My name is Nora Whitaker, and the night my mother-in-law destroyed herself, my son was wearing his father's blazer. It was navy wool, a little too broad in the shoulders, with brass buttons Daniel had polished himself the winter before he died. Caleb was 9 years old, thin in the wrists, careful with everything that belonged to his dad. He had asked me 3 times if the sleeves looked okay. He had asked twice if Grandmother Marion would like it. I told him yes. I said that because I wanted it to be true. The gala was held at the Palmetto Grand Hotel in Charleston, in a ballroom Marion Vale had rented for her annual Laurel House winter fundraiser. Everything looked expensive in that quiet old money way. White roses on every table, gold-rimmed plates, candles floating in glass bowls. A portrait of Daniel near the podium, lit from below like he was not a man who had died in a fire, but a saint Marion had personally commissioned. Caleb saw the portrait first. He stopped walking. "That's Dad," he whispered. "I know, baby." He held the small cream envelope tighter in both hands. Inside was the thank you card he had written that afternoon at our kitchen table. He had erased the first version because one letter leaned too far to the left. Then he had started again, slowly, with his tongue pressed against the corner of his mouth. "Thank you, Grandmother Marion, for remembering Daddy." He had signed it Caleb Archer Vale, his full name. The name Daniel gave him. The name Marion only used when cameras were around. At the entrance to the ballroom, there was a donor wall mock-up for the new campaign. Daniel's Harbor, it said in polished gold letters. Underneath were photos of smiling children, soft waves, and watercolor renderings of Wren Harbor. And right in the center was Caleb's face from when he was 6 years old, sitting on Daniel's shoulders at the dock. Below his photo, the caption read, "The first child who taught us why this work matters." Caleb smiled when he saw it. That small, hopeful smile children give when they think they have finally been chosen. I felt my stomach go cold. Because a child should never have to see his own face used as proof that he belongs. We walked toward the front row. Marion was standing beside the aisle in an ivory dress, her silver hair pinned low, one hand resting lightly on Elaine's twin boys. Miles and Henry wore matching blue ties. Their place cards sat in the front row beside Marion's chair. I scanned the cards. Marion Vale, Preston Vale, Elaine Vale Mercer, Miles Mercer, Henry Mercer, Board Chair, Councilwoman Greer, Reverend Ames. There was no card for Caleb. A young staff member with a headset looked down at her clipboard and said quietly, "Mrs. Whitaker, Caleb is listed downstairs with the youth volunteers after the opening tribute." Caleb looked up at me. Downstairs. Not beside his cousins, not near his father's portrait, not at the table where his face was raising money. I turned to Marion. "There must be a mistake." She smiled without showing teeth. The photographer was close enough to catch her good side. "Nora," she said softly, "please don't make the night ugly." That was Marion's talent. She could make cruelty sound like etiquette. Caleb stepped a little closer to me, his thank you card bent at one corner under his thumb. "I thought I was sitting with Grandmother," he said. Marion lowered herself just enough to look kind to anyone watching. She touched 2 fingers to the sleeve of Daniel's blazer. "Sweetheart," she said, "this front section is for the true Vale grandchildren. You are part of your mother's healing journey, but tonight is about blood legacy." The ballroom did not go silent all at once. It happened in layers. The staff member stopped moving her pen. The photographer lowered his camera. A donor behind me inhaled and did not let it out. Someone from the board turned halfway in her chair. The local reporter near the bar looked up from her phone. Caleb did not cry. That would have been easier. Crying would have made him look like a child who did not understand. But he understood. His face changed in a way I will never forget. The hope left first. Then the embarrassment came. Then something deeper, something too old for 9 years old. He looked at the donor wall again. His face was still there. His seat was not. Marion straightened and gave the room a small, graceful smile, as if she had handled a delicate family matter with dignity. Then she gestured toward the staff member. "He can wait downstairs until we need him for photographs." That was when I understood the whole design. Caleb was welcome as a symbol, He was not welcome as a grandson. His grief could sit on the donor wall. His picture could soften the wallets of strangers. His father's name could fill the ballroom. But the actual boy, the living child holding a card for his grandmother, was supposed to disappear below the stairs until Marion needed him again. I wanted to scream. I wanted to take Daniel's portrait off that stage and carry my son out of that room. Instead, I took one breath, then another. I put my hand on Caleb's shoulder and kept my voice low. "You stay with me." Marion's eyes flicked to mine. Just for a second, the softness dropped. She was not used to being refused in public. She was even less used to me refusing her without shaking. What she did not know was that I had learned, finally, not to hand her my anger before I handed her the truth. So I did not argue. I did not beg. I did not explain my son's right to stand under his father's name. I simply looked at the front row, at the donor wall, at the reporter, at the board members, at the staff members still holding the clipboard. And I remembered every word Marion had just said. True Vale grandchildren. Healing journey. Blood legacy. Downstairs until photographs. Those words mattered. Not because they broke my son's heart. Because this time, she had said them in a room full of witnesses. Daniel died on a Thursday in late September, 3 days after a storm tore through the South Carolina coast. He had driven out to a marina near Beaufort to inspect damage at a boat restoration yard. That was the kind of work he loved. Old wood, salt air, engines that sounded dead, until he found the one thing everyone else missed. He always said boats were honest because they showed you exactly where they were broken. That afternoon, an old electrical panel sparked behind a storage bay. The fire moved through the dry walls faster than anyone expected. By the time the first crew got there, the back half of the building was already smoke. Daniel was 38 years old. Caleb was 5. The last thing Caleb asked his father for was a shell. Not a toy, not a snack. A shell from the marina, because Daniel had once told him every dock had its own kind of quiet. Caleb believed him. He believed his father knew things other fathers did not know. That evening, Caleb fell asleep on the couch wearing dinosaur pajamas, one hand under his cheek. I remember the blue light from the television moving across his face. I remember my phone ringing. I remember seeing a number I did not recognize and feeling something inside me go still before I even answered. A deputy from Beaufort County asked if I was Daniel Vale's wife. No one asks that question at night unless your life is already divided into before and after. I do not remember every word after that. I remember the phrase accidental fire. I remember contained to the rear structure. I remember we are very sorry. I remember looking at Caleb's small foot sticking out from under the blanket and thinking I had to stay standing because the world had already taken his father. The next morning, I sat on the edge of Caleb's bed and told him Daniel was gone. He stared at me for a long time. Then he asked if Daddy had brought the shell. That was the first time grief made me lie. I told him I did not know yet. For months after the funeral, I moved like someone carrying a glass bowl full of water. Every step had to be careful. Too fast, and everything would spill. I learned which grocery aisle made me cry. I learned how to sign school forms as parent/guardian without staring at the blank space where Daniel's name used to go. I learned that children ask the hardest questions in the softest voices. Does Daddy know I miss him? Can he see my drawings? Will I forget his laugh? I worked from home because I could not imagine leaving Caleb with anyone for full days yet. Before Daniel died, I had been a compliance auditor for nonprofit grant programs. It was not glamorous work, but I was good at it. I reviewed expense reports, donor restrictions, school contracts, reimbursement claims, and board documentation for small education organizations. I knew how to read a budget line that had been dressed up to hide something ugly. I knew the difference between money promised and money delivered. I knew documents did not care how kind a person sounded. But in that first year, I did not use those skills on Daniel's family. I used them to survive. I checked invoices, I paid the mortgage, I stretched insurance money. I built Caleb a routine so tight it could hold him when I could not. Breakfast at 7, school drop-off at 8, therapy on Wednesdays. Pancakes on Saturdays because Daniel made them too big and called them dock worker pancakes. At night, Caleb slept with Daniel's old navy blazer folded at the foot of his bed. It had been Daniel's favorite dress jacket, the one he wore to weddings and foundation dinners, and the one Marian always said made him look properly Vale. Caleb liked the brass buttons. Sometimes he touched them before falling asleep, as if they were proof his father had been real. Wren Harbor became another kind of proof. Daniel had loved that place more than any other property tied to the Vale name. It sat along a quiet stretch of coast north of Charleston, with a weathered dock, a cedar-shingled cottage, and an old boathouse that leaned slightly toward the water. It had belonged to Daniel's maternal grandfather, Arthur Archer, not to Marian. Daniel used to say that mattered. He never explained why. I thought he meant family nostalgia. After he died, Caleb asked about Wren Harbor often. He remembered the dock. He remembered Daniel showing him how to hold a crab net. He remembered the way the cottage smelled like cedar and damp rope. He drew it from memory in kindergarten, always with the same crooked dock and one large sun. I kept those drawings in a folder. I did not know there were other documents waiting in another folder. Documents Daniel had left behind because he understood his mother better than I did. Back then, I only knew I was tired. And that was when Marian came in. Marian Vale did not arrive like a villain. She arrived with food. Chicken pie in a white ceramic dish, linen napkins, a list of funeral contacts already written out. She sat beside me at the dining room table and said, "You do not have to think right now, Nora. Let us carry the heavy things." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. She arranged flowers. She chose hymns. She spoke to the funeral director when I could not make my mouth form decisions. She told people Caleb was being protected. She told me Daniel would want the family close. She told me Laurel House, the foundation she was starting in Daniel's memory, would make sure no grieving child felt forgotten. At the funeral, she held Caleb's hand for a photograph. He leaned into her because he wanted a grandmother. She looked down at him because there were cameras. I did not know the difference yet. In those early months, Marian made herself necessary. She offered to help with Caleb's therapy referrals. She asked for copies of school invoices for foundation records. She said the Vale family attorneys could help sort Daniel's estate. She said I should not exhaust myself trying to understand everything at once. "You are still in shock," she told me more than once. "Let the family protect Daniel's legacy." That word came up again and again. Legacy. At first, I thought it meant memory. I did not understand that, to Marian, legacy meant ownership. So I gave her access. Not to everything, but enough. Enough for her to know which school Caleb attended. Enough for her to understand our therapy schedule. Enough for her to collect photos for donor materials. Enough for her to stand in front of Charleston women with Caleb beside her and say grief had called her to service. I told myself it was good for Caleb to stay connected to the Vales. Daniel was gone. I did not want Caleb to lose his father's family, too. That fear made me polite when I should have been careful. It made me grateful when I should have been asking questions. It made me hand Marian pieces of our story because she promised she was helping me carry them. And for a while, it looked like help. Caleb got invitations. Marian called him Daniel's boy. His photo appeared in the first Laurel House brochure. Donors touched his shoulder and told him his father would be proud. Marian cried at luncheons and said my son had taught her the sacred duty of caring for grieving children. I sat in the back of those rooms with my hands folded and told myself Daniel would be glad Caleb was surrounded by love. But love does not need a photographer. Love does not ask for invoices it never pays. Love does not call a child a legacy in public and a complication in private. I did not know that yet. All I knew was that my husband was dead, my son was hurting, and Marian Vale was offering me a chair when I could barely stand. So I sat down. That was the first mistake. The first time I saw Caleb's face in a Laurel House brochure, I cried. Not because I was angry, because I thought it meant he was loved. The brochure came in a thick cream envelope with Marian's return address printed in raised navy ink. Everything Marian touched looked like it had been approved by a committee of old Charleston women who knew exactly which shade of blue meant money. The paper was heavy, the photographs were soft. The language was careful. The Laurel House Foundation, art, therapy, and belonging for children walking through grief. On the third page, there was a picture of Caleb sitting on the dock at Wren Harbor. He was 6 in that photo. His hair was too long because I had not been ready to take him to the barber Daniel used. He was holding a shell in one hand and looking down at the water like he expected his father to come up from underneath it. Under the picture, Marion had written, "Every grieving child deserves a seat at the table." Below that, in smaller print, she called Caleb the first child who showed us why this work matters. I sat at my kitchen table with that brochure in my hands and let myself believe it was beautiful. That was how Marion worked. She never grabbed power. She wrapped it in gratitude and waited for you to hand it to her. By then, the Laurel House Foundation was only 6 months old, but Marion had already made it look like an institution. She had a website with watercolor leaves in the header. She had a board of women who wore pearls to weekday lunches. She had a mission statement, a donor portal, a quarterly newsletter, and a photographer who somehow made every room look like morning light was pouring in from heaven. People in Charleston loved her for it. They loved the story of a mother turning the loss of her son into service. They loved the image of Marion standing beside easels and therapy dogs and children holding paintbrushes. They loved hearing her say grief should not make children feel poor, forgotten, or alone. And I loved hearing it too, because Caleb was poor in a way money could not fix. He was forgotten by the ordinary world every time another father came to school pickup. He was alone in the back seat when he asked questions I could not answer. So when Marion said Laurel House would help children like him, I wanted to believe she meant Caleb first. The first donor luncheon was held at a private club near the Battery. I remember the smell of lemon polish and old wood. I remember Marion's ivory suit. I remember Caleb standing beside me in a clip-on tie, one hand tucked into mine, while women bent down and told him he had his father's eyes. Marion walked to the podium with a folded note card she never looked at. She spoke about Daniel as if she had been the person who knew him best. She talked about his kindness, his love of the water, his patience with broken things. Some of it was true. Some of it sounded true enough that no one would question it. Then she called Caleb forward. He looked at me first. I nodded. He walked to Marion, and she placed both hands on his shoulders. "This is Daniel's boy," she said. "This is the child who taught me that grief needs more than sympathy. It needs a home." The room melted. Women wiped their eyes. A man at the back took out his checkbook before dessert was served. The photographer moved closer. Marion tilted Caleb slightly toward the camera. That was the first time I saw it and did not understand what I was seeing. Caleb was not being held. He was being positioned. After the luncheon, Marion hugged me in the lobby and whispered, "You were so brave today." I felt grateful, embarrassingly grateful. I had spent months feeling like a cracked dish someone kept using because there was no replacement. Marion made me feel for a few minutes like maybe I had not ruined everything by surviving Daniel. She told me the foundation would keep Caleb connected to Daniel's legacy. She said donors wanted to help with school support, art programs, and grief resources. She asked for a few more photographs of Caleb with Daniel. She asked for a copy of Caleb's school information so the foundation could understand the need. She asked whether I had any pictures from Wren Harbor. I sent them. Not all at once, not blindly, but enough. A picture of Caleb on Daniel's shoulders. A picture of Daniel teaching Caleb to tie a dock line. A picture of the old boathouse at Wren Harbor. A picture of Caleb holding a shell the summer before Daniel died. I thought I was helping Marion tell a story about love. I did not realize I was giving her the pieces of a brand. Within months, Caleb became the emotional center of Laurel House without ever receiving anything concrete from it. His photo appeared in the newsletter. His name came up in Marion's speeches. Donors mailed cards to the foundation office, addressed to Daniel's little boy. Marion forwarded some of them to me with notes like, "See how loved he is?" I taped 2 of those cards above Caleb's desk. He read them more than once. At night, he asked if the people from Grandmother Marion's foundation knew Daddy. "Some of them did," I said. "Do they miss him too?" "I think they do." He seemed comforted by that. So was I. That was the dangerous part. Marion's version of love looked comforting from a distance. It had flowers and scripture and thank you notes. It had words like legacy, healing, service, and family. It made people feel generous. It made me feel less alone. It made Caleb feel, briefly, like his father's side of the family still had a place for him. But every time Caleb appeared in Marion's world, he appeared as evidence. Evidence that she was noble. Evidence that Daniel's death had produced something meaningful. Evidence that donors were not just giving money, they were helping a real child with a real face and a dead father. I did not ask then whether Caleb's therapy had been paid. I did not ask whether the school support Marion mentioned had been approved. I did not ask who owned the photos once they were printed. I did not ask why Daniel's favorite place, Wren Harbor, kept showing up in Marion's language when the foundation had no program there. I was still measuring kindness by tone of voice. Marion's tone was perfect. At the end of that first year, Laurel House held a small holiday reception. Caleb's picture was on the welcome table in a silver frame. Marion introduced him to a donor as our beginning, not my grandson, not Daniel's son, our beginning. I remember the phrase because something about it bothered me. It was too polished, too useful. But Caleb was standing beside me with frosting on his upper lip from a sugar cookie, and he looked happy to be included. So I swallowed the feeling. I told myself Marion was doing good work. I told myself Daniel would want his name connected to something that helped children. I told myself Caleb was lucky to have a grandmother with the resources to build something out of grief. And because I told myself those things, Marion gained exactly what she needed. Access to Daniel's memory. Access to Caleb's image. Access to my trust. The woman Charleston called Saint Marion did not steal those things in the dark. I handed them to her in daylight, one photograph at a time. The first time Caleb disappeared, I blamed the website. Laurel House had redesigned its homepage that spring. Marion sent a group text with a link and 3 white heart emojis, the way she did when she wanted praise, without asking for it directly. The new site looked beautiful. Soft green leaves, cream backgrounds, photos of children painting at long tables, a quote from Daniel near the bottom. Grief does not end a childhood. It asks a community to carry it. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Daniel had never said it. It sounded like something Marion wished Daniel had said because it fit neatly under a donation button. I scrolled through the homepage once, then again. Caleb's doc photo was gone. The first child who taught us why this work matters line was gone too. In its place was a wide photo of Elaine's twin boys, Miles and Henry, standing beside easels in matching linen shirts. They were not grieving children. Their father was alive. Their mother was alive. They had never received Laurel House services. But they photographed beautifully. Blonde hair, clean collars, big eyes. The kind of children donors looked at and called precious. I texted Marion and asked whether Caleb's page had moved. She called me instead of texting back. That was one of her habits. Marion liked conversations she could later summarize any way she wanted. "Oh, Nora," she said, warm and light. "The designer simply refreshed the layout. Caleb is still very much in our hearts. But his photo is gone. For now, yes, we are being thoughtful about his privacy. I know how sensitive he is." Caleb was not sensitive about the website. He did not even know it had changed. I was the one staring at the missing space. Still, Marion's explanation landed exactly where she meant it to land, on my guilt. Maybe I had been careless. Maybe I had let his picture circulate too much. Maybe privacy was better. So I thanked her. I actually thanked her. The second disappearance happened in the hallway at the Laurel House office. The office sat in a converted carriage house behind a church on Queen Street. Marion had decorated it like a magazine spread. Framed pressed flowers, brass lamps, bowls of peppermints. Along the main hallway, she kept a display called Children We Serve. The first time I saw it, Caleb's picture had been in the center. By the next fall, his frame was gone. In its place was a professional portrait of Miles and Henry holding paintbrushes. I stood there with my purse still on my shoulder and felt something small and sharp move under my ribs. Marion came up behind me with 2 mugs of tea. "Lovely, isn't it?" she said. Where is Caleb's picture? She looked at the wall, as if noticing it for the first time. Oh, we rotated some things. The twins were here for the summer art day, and the photographer got such a darling shot. They aren't children you serve. Her smile stayed in place, but her eyes changed. Nora, Laurel House serves the whole community. Please do not make everything so narrow. Narrow. That was the word she used when I asked for accuracy. I did not argue. There were volunteers in the next room tying ribbons around donor packets. A board member I barely knew was carrying a tray of cookies. I could already imagine Marion telling them I had become emotional in the hallway over a picture frame. So I let it go. But that night, after Caleb went to bed, I opened the Laurel House website on my laptop. I clicked through every page. I found 4 photos of Miles and Henry, 2 of Elaine, 3 of Marion, 1 old photo of Daniel cropped so tightly you could not see me standing beside him, 0 of Caleb. I wrote the numbers down on the back of an electric bill. I did not know I was starting a record. The 3rd disappearance happened at a family luncheon. Marion hosted it at her house after church. Preston carved ham at the sideboard while Elaine poured sparkling lemonade for the boys. Caleb had spent the morning drawing a sailboat on a folded card for Marion because she had mailed him an invitation with his name written in blue ink. He thought the invitation meant something. When we arrived, the dining room table had place cards. Marion's calligraphy was perfect, of course. Preston, Elaine, Miles, Henry, Reverend Ames, 2 board ladies, me, no Caleb. His card was on a small round table near the window with 3 children from a board member's family and a teenager who had been hired to help serve. Caleb saw it before I did. "Mom," he whispered, "am I over there?" Marion appeared beside us, smelling like gardenias. "The young people will have more fun together," she said. "Henry is younger than Caleb," I said. "Yes, but Henry gets overwhelmed when separated from Miles." It was such a smooth answer that it took me a second to understand the meaning underneath it. Henry's comfort mattered. Caleb's belonging did not. At lunch, Caleb sat at the little table and ate quietly. He kept looking toward the dining room whenever someone laughed. Marion toasted Daniel's legacy before dessert. She called Miles and Henry the next generation of Vale gentlemen. Caleb looked down at his plate. On the drive home, he asked, "Do you think grandmother forgot I'm a Vale too?" I kept my eyes on the road. "No," I said. "She knows." That was the first answer I gave him that sounded comforting, but felt like a warning. The 4th disappearance was not subtle. Caleb turned 8 in March. It was his first birthday where he talked about Daniel without crying. We had cupcakes in the backyard, 3 classmates from school, a rented bubble machine, and a blue paper banner Caleb helped tape to the fence. Marion arrived 40 minutes late. Preston carried a gift bag from a pharmacy. Inside was a $25 bookstore card and a blank birthday card Marion had signed in the driveway. She kissed Caleb on the top of his head and told him she hoped he would buy something cheerful. She stayed 19 minutes. She did not eat a cupcake. 2 days later, Elaine posted photos from Miles and Henry's half-birthday celebration at the Sailing Academy. Not even a real birthday. A half-birthday. Marion had paid for custom jackets, a private instructor, and a catered dockside lunch. The caption said, "Grandmother knows what lights up her boys." Her boys. I stared at those words until the screen dimmed. Caleb had been talking for months about a model boat kit he wanted to build. Because Daniel used to fix boats, Marion knew that. I had sent her the link when she asked what he liked. She did not forget. She chose not to know. That night, I created a folder on my computer. I named it Household. Not evidence, not Marion, nothing dramatic. Household. Inside, I saved screenshots of the website, Elaine's post, Caleb's missing hallway photo, and the luncheon invitation. I told myself I was only keeping things in case I needed to explain my concerns clearly later. That was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that my body had started believing what my mind still resisted. Something was happening to my son. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not outdated web design. It was not privacy. It was not seeding logistics. It was not a grandmother who did not know what 8-year-old boys liked. It was a pattern. But patterns are cruel in a special way. Each piece alone looks small enough to forgive. Together, they form a cage. Marian understood that. She never slammed a door. She moved Caleb one chair farther away. She replaced one photo. She skipped one gift. She softened one insult with concern. She made every injury look too minor to confront without making me look unstable. And Caleb felt every one of them. He stopped asking to visit Marian's house. Then he started asking again, but differently. Will my cousins be there? Will I sit with you? Do I have to bring a card? That last question hurt the most. He had begun to understand that love in Marian's house required presentation. A drawing, a thank you note, a polite smile, a blazer, proof that he was good enough to be included. One evening I found him at his desk with the old Laurel House brochure open beside his homework. His 6-year-old face looked back from the page, small and hopeful. He touched the caption with one finger. "Mom," he asked, "if I was the first child, why am I not on the wall anymore?" I did not have a soft answer left, so I said, "I don't know yet." Yet. That word changed something in me. I did not accuse Marian the next morning. I did not call Elaine. I did not post anything online. I did what I knew how to do. I opened the household folder. I made subfolders. Website, family seating, foundation display, birthdays, public language. Then I moved every screenshot into its place. For the first time since Daniel died, I stopped trying to make Marian's behavior make emotional sense. I started treating it like data. And the data was ugly. The first time Marian called me unstable, she did not use the word. That was the trick. She used softer words. Words people could repeat without feeling cruel. Concerned. Overwhelmed, still healing, not in a clear season. Not in. She said them the way other women said, bless her heart. Gentle enough to pass as sympathy. Sharp enough to leave a mark. It started after the luncheon where Caleb had been seated away from the family table. I waited 2 days before texting her. I had learned not to write while angry. I typed the message 3 times and kept only the plain facts. Caleb noticed he was not seated with Miles and Henry. He was hurt. Going forward, please include him at the family table if he is invited as family. Marian did not answer for 4 hours. Then she sent back. Nora, I know these things feel larger to you right now. Grief can make small moments feel like rejection. I am praying for peace over your heart. I read it twice. Then I read it again. She had not answered the request. She had not mentioned Caleb's hurt. She had turned the whole thing into my emotional condition. I wanted to send back a paragraph. I wanted to say, no, Marian, this is not grief. This is a seating chart. A chair is either there or it is not. But I did not. I screenshotted the message and put it in the household folder. That was the first time I saved one of her soft attacks. After that, I began noticing how many people already knew a version of me I had never written. At church, one of Marian's friends touched my arm near the coffee table and said, I hope you are letting the veils help, dear. A young widow cannot carry everything without becoming suspicious of kindness. Suspicious of kindness. That phrase had Marian's fingerprints all over it. At Caleb's school fundraiser, Elaine asked whether I was doing better with the family stuff. She said it quietly, but not kindly. When I asked what she meant, she gave me a sad little look and said, Mom just worries that you see things through Daniel's loss. Daniel's loss. Not Daniel's death, not my husband. A phrase polished enough for donors. Then came the board language. I had emailed Laurel House to ask for copies of any materials using Caleb's name or image. I kept the email professional. I cited parental consent. I did not accuse anyone. I simply requested records. A week later, the board chair, Margaret Ellison, replied on Foundation letterhead, Mrs. Whitaker, we understand that you are not in a season of clear judgment and that continued grief may make public-facing family matters feel difficult. At this time, the Laurel House Foundation believes all materials have been used in accordance with the family's shared understanding of Daniel Vale's legacy. I sat at my desk and stared at that sentence until the words blurred. Not in a season of clear judgment. There it was. Not from Marian's phone. Not whispered through relatives. Official. Written. On letterhead. That was when I understood the false narrative was not gossip. It was infrastructure. Marian had built a version of me that could be used in any room where I was not present. If I asked about Caleb's photo, I was unstable. If I asked about money, I was confused. If I questioned family seating, I was bitter. If I objected to Daniel's name being used, I was interfering with healing. Every door had the same lock. Nora is not well enough to understand. That realization scared me more than the missing photos. Because a child can be erased quietly when the only person objecting has already been labeled unreliable. I began changing how I moved. I stopped calling Marian. I stopped having hallway conversations. I stopped explaining myself on the phone unless I could take notes immediately afterward. When I texted, I wrote like someone who expected the message to be read in court someday. Short, clear, dated. No emotion she could twist into proof. Marian noticed. One evening, she called while I was loading the dishwasher. I let it ring. Then I texted, "Please put any foundation-related questions in writing." She responded almost immediately. "How sad that we have come to this. Daniel would hate seeing you so guarded." That one hurt. She knew it would. Daniel had been open-hearted. He forgave too quickly. He trusted people with his whole face. Marian loved using his best qualities as weapons against me. I saved that message too. The more I saved, the more I saw the pattern. Marian was not defending herself from one accusation. She was preparing for accusations she knew might come. She told Preston I was too emotional to handle estate matters. She told Elaine I was isolating Caleb from the family. She told donors I had requested privacy for Caleb. She told the board my grief made me difficult around Daniel's legacy. She told everyone a slightly different story, but every version did the same job. It made Marian look patient. It made me look unstable. It made Caleb's exclusion look like protection. One Sunday afternoon, Caleb asked if we could skip Marian's house for dinner. He said his stomach hurt. I knew that kind of stomach ache. It was the body trying to refuse what the mouth was afraid to say. I texted Marian that we would not make it. She wrote back, "I worry about the stories you are teaching him to believe." I stood in my kitchen with the phone in my hand and felt the old version of me rise up. The version that wanted to defend herself. The version that wanted to type 1,000 words. The version Marian knew how to beat. Then Caleb walked in wearing socks with holes in the toes and asked if we could make grilled cheese. I looked at him and understood something simple. My job was not to convince Marian I was a good mother. My job was to make sure no one could use her lies to take my authority from me. So I put the phone down. I made grilled cheese. After Caleb went to bed, I opened the household folder and created a new subfolder. False narrative. Inside, I placed Marian's texts, the board letter, screenshots of Elaine's messages, notes from conversations where people repeated Marian's phrases. I wrote dates, names, exact wording when I could remember it. For the first time, the folder did not feel like paranoia. It felt like protection. I was still lonely. I was still angry. I still cried in the shower some nights because Daniel was not there to tell me whether I was seeing clearly. But I was done handing Marian reactions she could frame. If she wanted to call me unstable, she would have to do it in writing. And eventually she did. A single unpaid tuition invoice becomes the first piece of evidence that something is fundamentally wrong. What begins as an ordinary phone call to Caleb's school slowly reveals that Marian's charity may have been using my son's story to raise money, while quietly giving him nothing at all. Until that spring, every strange thing Marian had done could still be explained away. The missing website photo, the changed seating chart, the donor wall, the birthday that somehow mattered less than my nephew's sailing lessons. None of those moments felt good, but each one came wrapped in a polite explanation. Privacy, logistics, timing, tradition. Marian always had a reason ready before anyone asked the question. I kept telling myself that patterns could be accidents. Then the tuition invoice arrived. It wasn't dramatic. No certified envelope, no threatening notice, just a plain white statement folded into thirds with Caleb's school's logo in the upper left corner. Balance due. I almost threw it away. The amount wasn't enormous, it was simply another monthly payment, except one sentence immediately caught my attention. Previous commitment not received. I frowned. That didn't make sense. About a year earlier, Marion had insisted Laurel House would cover Caleb's tuition at Harbor Ridge Academy, a small private school with an integrated counseling program for children dealing with trauma and loss. It had been her idea. She said Caleb needed smaller classrooms. She said Daniel would have wanted him surrounded by teachers who understood grief. She even offered to take care of the paperwork. I remembered sitting at my dining room table while she carefully organized the forms into neat piles. "I'll have Laurel House handle this," she'd said. "You have enough on your shoulders." At the time, I almost cried from relief. I thanked her 3 separate times. Now I was staring at an invoice that suggested something very different. I called the school's business office the next morning. A woman named Linda answered. She had one of those calm voices that made every sentence sound organized. I explained that I thought there had been a mistake regarding Caleb's tuition account. She typed for a few moments. "I see your payment plan, Mrs. Whitaker." "So Laurel House has been paying their portion?" Silence. Then another few keystrokes. "I'm sorry." "What foundation?" I felt my stomach tighten. The Laurel House Foundation. My mother-in-law said they were sponsoring Caleb. Another pause. "I'm not seeing any payments from a foundation." "Could you check again?" "I already did." "Maybe under Daniel Vale?" "No, ma'am." "What I do see is that someone requested copies of Caleb's invoices several times over the past year." My heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. That happened whenever something stopped being emotional and became factual. "Who requested them?" Linda clicked again. "The requests came from Marion Vale." "When?" She gave me 4 dates. Each one matched weeks before Laurel House fundraising events. I wrote every date down. "What did she say the invoices were for?" Linda hesitated. "Foundation records." I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat perfectly still. Marion had requested Caleb's tuition invoices. She had never paid them. I opened my filing cabinet. Every tuition payment I'd made over the previous year was there. Canceled checks, bank confirmations, credit card statements. Every single payment had come from me. Not Laurel House, not Marion. Me. Some months I'd skipped buying new clothes. One month I'd postponed repairing my car. Another month I'd taken an extra compliance contract reviewing federal grant documentation until nearly midnight every evening. While I was sacrificing to keep Caleb in the school Marion recommended, she was collecting invoices. I didn't call her. Old Nora would have. She would have demanded an explanation. She would have accepted another polished answer. Instead, I opened a spreadsheet. That was the compliance auditor in me finally waking back up. I created columns. Date invoice requested. Date donor event. Payment made. Payment source. Foundation contribution. Comments. Then I started entering information. Within 40 minutes, a pattern appeared. Every invoice request happened shortly before a donor luncheon. Every payment came from my own bank account. Every foundation contribution totaled exactly 0. Numbers have a way of stripping emotion away. They don't argue, they don't flatter, they simply refuse to lie. 2 days later, another piece arrived, completely by accident. One of my neighbors, Helen, volunteered occasionally at Laurel House. She stopped by with a casserole because Caleb had been sick over the weekend. As she was leaving, she frowned. "Oh, goodness." I almost forgot. She reached into her tote bag. "I think this belongs to you." She handed me a glossy donor packet. I found it in the volunteer room. It had Caleb's picture all over it. I figured maybe Marion wanted you to have one. I thanked her. The packet looked familiar. Cream paper, gold lettering, professional photography. Except this wasn't the brochure I'd seen before. This was created specifically for major donors. Inside was a section called Real Families, Real Healing. The first family was ours. There was the same photograph of Caleb sitting on Daniel's shoulders at Wren Harbor. But the text underneath made my hands go cold. Caleb's education remained stable after losing his father thanks to generous Laurel House supporters. I read it again, then a third time. No, it hadn't. Laurel House hadn't paid $1 toward his education. Every tuition payment had come from me. The brochure continued. Your gifts provide therapy, educational continuity, and hope for children like Caleb. Like Caleb, not Caleb. That tiny wording mattered. It implied donors were helping him, without actually saying how. Legally clever, morally disgusting. I carried the brochure into my office, next to my spreadsheet, next to the tuition records. For almost an hour I compared dates. Invoice request, donor luncheon, printed brochure, fundraising dinner, another invoice request, another donor appeal, another payment from my checking account. Not Laurel House, not Marion, me. I wasn't looking at isolated events anymore. I was looking at a system. That realization changed the way I saw everything Marion had done. The photographs, the speeches, the newsletters. She hadn't been documenting Caleb's healing. She had been documenting a fundraising story. I thought back to every donor who had squeezed Caleb's shoulder and said, "We're so happy we could help." None of them had been lying. They believed they had helped. Someone had told them they already were. That night, after Caleb went to bed, I opened the folder on my computer that I'd originally called Household. I looked at the name for several seconds. It no longer fit. This wasn't household organization anymore. This wasn't keeping track of family disappointments. This was something else. I created a new master folder, case file. Inside it, I made separate folders: family, foundation, financial, communications, public materials, school. Then I scanned every tuition invoice, every payment confirmation, every email, every donor brochure, every screenshot, every note I'd written after speaking with Marion. I backed everything up onto an external drive, then onto encrypted cloud storage. Not because I planned to sue anyone. Not yet. Because years in compliance had taught me one simple lesson. The first document is rarely the one that proves fraud. The first document simply teaches you where to look next. When I finally shut my laptop, it was nearly 1 a.m. The house was quiet. I walked past Caleb's bedroom. He was asleep, curled around Daniel's old navy blazer, like it was still capable of protecting him. I stood there for a long time. Until then, I had believed Marion's greatest cruelty was making my son feel like less of a grandson. Now I understood something far worse. She wasn't just excluding him. She was profiting from the appearance of loving him. And for the first time since Daniel died, I stopped asking myself whether I was imagining things. I started asking a different question. If the money hadn't gone to Caleb, where had it gone? One ordinary Tuesday morning, a single email landed in my inbox by mistake. At first, it looked like nothing more than a bookkeeping error. By the end of the week, it had changed the direction of everything I believed about Daniel's family, Marion's foundation, and the future my husband thought he had protected for our son. By the time the tuition records were organized into my case file, my life had quietly changed. From the outside, nothing looked different. I still packed Caleb's lunch every morning. I still drove him to Harbor Ridge Academy. I still worked from the small office Daniel had built for me in what used to be our guest bedroom. The bookshelves still held the same binders. The same framed picture from our honeymoon in Maine sat beside my monitor. The same coffee mug with a chipped handle stayed beside my keyboard almost every afternoon. Anyone looking through the front window would have seen an ordinary widow raising her son. Inside, however, something had shifted. I had stopped reacting. I had started documenting. That distinction mattered more than I realized. Years of compliance work had trained my brain to recognize something most people overlooked. Fraud almost never begins with missing money. It begins with inconsistent paperwork. People lie with stories. Documents lie with patterns. I reminded myself of that every time I opened my growing folder labeled Case File. Then, one Tuesday morning, while reviewing grant reimbursement reports for one of my nonprofit clients, Outlook chimed with a new email. The sender was someone I didn't recognize. Denise Wu. The subject line read, R.E. Wren Harbor Donor Collateral Transfer. For a second, I assumed it was spam. Then I noticed the sender's address, denise.wu@laurelhouse.org. I frowned. The message opened automatically in the preview pane. Marion, before we finalize the donor collateral package, I need confirmation that Mrs. Whitaker has executed the image and legacy release. Legal also requested clarification regarding Caleb's trust interest before campaign language is approved. Please advise before the board packet is assembled. Thanks, Denise. I stared at the screen. The email ended there. No greeting addressed to me, no explanation, no attachment. Nothing. Someone had simply typed the wrong address. For almost a full minute, I didn't move. My eyes kept returning to 3 phrases: image and legacy release, Caleb's trust interest, Wren Harbor. I had never heard any of them used together. The first thing I checked was whether I'd forgotten signing something. I opened the filing cabinet beside my desk. Every document Marion had ever asked me to sign was organized by year. School authorization forms, photo permissions, medical information, holiday event waivers, nothing called an image and legacy release. Nothing mentioning Wren Harbor. Nothing mentioning Caleb's trust. I checked again anyway. Still nothing. Then I searched my email. Release, legacy, Wren Harbor, trust. 0 results. Whatever Denise was talking about, I had never seen it. My first instinct was to ignore the email. The second was to call Marion immediately. Instead, I did something smaller. I replied, I think this message may have been sent to me by mistake. Could you clarify what release you're referring to? Thank you, Nora Whitaker. I pressed send. Less than 30 seconds later, the message bounced. Delivery failed. The Laurel House address no longer existed. I blinked. I copied Denise's email into my case file before doing anything else. Then, curiosity won. I searched Laurel House's website. No Denise Wu. I searched LinkedIn. A profile appeared. Denise Wu, bookkeeper, the Laurel House Foundation. Her employment had ended the previous week. No announcement, no farewell, no explanation. Just gone. That unsettled me more than the email itself. People leave jobs every day. Bookkeepers rarely disappear the same week they ask legal questions about trust interests. I printed the email. Then I highlighted every unfamiliar phrase. Image and legacy release. Trust interest. Donor collateral. Campaign language. Wren Harbor. One thing immediately stood out. I knew Wren Harbor, or at least I thought I did. Wren Harbor wasn't a charity project. It wasn't a Laurel House location. It wasn't connected to donor programs. It was simply the place Daniel loved most. The weathered cottage, the old dock, the boathouse that leaned a little farther every winter. The place where Caleb caught his first blue crab. The place where Daniel proposed to me. Why was it showing up inside Foundation correspondence? That afternoon, I picked Caleb up from school. He climbed into the back seat carrying a paper lighthouse he'd made in art class. It looks like Wren Harbor, he said proudly. I smiled. It really does. I wish we went there more. So do I. He looked out the window. Dad always smiled different there. Children notice things adults don't. Not bigger things, quieter things. Daniel did smile differently at Wren Harbor, more relaxed, more himself. As if the place belonged to a version of him that existed before expectations. I hadn't thought about that in years. That night, after Caleb was asleep, I opened the attic. Daniel kept boxes up there labeled in his own handwriting. Taxes, camping, Christmas, boats, insurance. Most were exactly what they claimed to be. Daniel had always been organized. I wasn't searching for anything specific. Just Wren Harbor. Maybe an old deed. Maybe photographs. Maybe nothing. Dust floated through the flashlight beam while I worked through cardboard boxes one by one. Old fishing maps. Dock permits. maintenance receipts, family photographs. Then I found a narrow cedar box tucked behind 2 storage bins. It wasn't labeled. Inside were letters tied together with faded blue ribbon. The handwriting wasn't Daniel's. It belonged to Arthur Archer, Daniel's maternal grandfather. I recognized the name because Daniel spoke about Arthur with quiet affection. Arthur had taught him to repair engines, to fish, to respect tides, to leave a place cleaner than he found it. Beneath the letters sat folded property surveys for Wren Harbor dating back decades. Nothing unusual. Then I noticed a small cream envelope. My name was written across the front, not in Daniel's everyday handwriting, in the careful block letters he used when something mattered. I opened it slowly. Inside was only one index card. No explanation, no legal language, just a single handwritten sentence. If Mom ever tries to make Wren Harbor into a monument, call Adrienne. That was all. Adrienne. I knew exactly who that was. Adrienne Bell, Daniel's estate attorney. I'd met her twice. Once when Daniel updated our wills, once after the funeral. Nothing more. I turned the card over, blank. I read it again. If Mom ever tries, not if anything happens, not if the property needs work, not if you sell it. Daniel had written specifically about Marion, specifically about Wren Harbor, years before the gala, years before Laurel House, years before Denise's email. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold attic. Daniel had expected something, not hoped, expected. I looked back into the cedar box. There were no legal documents, no trust paperwork, only Arthur's letters, property surveys, old photographs, the note, whatever Daniel wanted Adrienne to show me. He hadn't left it here. He'd left instructions instead. That told me something important. He hadn't trusted paper left inside this house. He had trusted someone else to protect it. For the next hour, I sat on the attic floor, surrounded by decades of Daniel's life. The pieces no longer felt separate. The tuition invoice, the donor brochure, the missing website photos, the family seating, the wrong email, the mysterious release, Caleb's trust interest, Wren Harbor. Individually, they explained nothing. Together they pointed in one direction, towards something Marion believed I didn't know existed. I carefully returned every letter to the cedar box. The index card stayed in my hand. Before climbing downstairs, I took one photograph of it with my phone, then another. Then I placed the original inside a clear archival sleeve in my growing case file. Not because it proved anything. It didn't. Not yet. But it was the first piece of evidence Daniel had left me himself. Not evidence against Marion. Evidence that he had anticipated her. The next morning I called Adrienne Bell's office. Her assistant answered. When I gave my name, there was a brief pause. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. Mrs. Whitaker, Ms. Bell has been hoping you'd call someday. I wrote down the appointment time she offered. Hung up the phone, closed my eyes. For the first time since Daniel died, I realized I might not be uncovering a misunderstanding. I might be walking into a plan my husband had quietly prepared years before he ever needed it. Adrienne Bell opens the part of Daniel's estate file I never knew existed. What I thought was only a family property becomes Caleb's protected inheritance, and I realized Daniel had seen Marion clearly long before I did. Adrienne Bell's office was on the 3rd floor of a narrow brick building near Broad Street. There was no marble lobby, no dramatic view, no wall of awards meant to make clients feel small. Just dark wood floors, framed maps of old Charleston properties, and a receptionist who looked at me like she had been expecting me for years. I arrived 20 minutes early because I had not slept. The index card from Daniel sat inside a plastic sleeve in my purse. I had checked 3 times before leaving the house, then once more in the parking garage. It was ridiculous, but I could not shake the feeling that if I lost that card, I would lose the last clear instruction Daniel had ever left for me. If Mom ever tries to make Wren Harbor into a monument, call Adrienne. I had read those words so many times they no longer felt like a sentence. They felt like a door. Adrienne came out herself. She was in her late 50s, tall, with gray hair cut at her jaw and reading glasses hanging from a black cord around her neck. Daniel had trusted her because she never wasted words. I remembered that from the first time we met. She had explained our wills in plain English and told Daniel he was smart to think ahead. Back then, I thought smart meant responsible. Now I wondered what he had been afraid of. Adrian shook my hand with both of hers. "Nora," she said, "I'm sorry it took this long. Not, I'm sorry for your loss. Not, how are you holding up? I'm sorry it took this long." That was the first clue that she knew more than I did. She led me into her office and closed the door. On her desk sat a thick navy folder with a white label. Archer Trust. My mouth went dry. "I don't understand," I said. Adrian sat across from me. "You weren't meant to need this right away." "Need what?" She rested one hand on the folder. "Daniel created a trust 18 months before he died. He named it after Arthur Archer." I knew Arthur's name, Daniel's maternal grandfather, Wren Harbor's original owner, the man who had taught Daniel about boats and tides and how to fix things instead of replacing them. But a trust? Daniel had never told me the details. Or maybe he had tried, and I had been too busy with Caleb, bills, work, and ordinary life to understand the weight of it. Adrienne opened the folder. The first document was formal, dense, legal, pages of definitions and clauses. She did not make me read it cold. She turned it toward me and pointed to one section at a time. Daniel placed his 42% interest in Wren Harbor into trust for Caleb. I stared at the words. 42%. Wren Harbor for Caleb. My mind went immediately to Marion's foundation email. Donor collateral, campaign language, Caleb's trust interest. Adrienne watched my face change. "Yes," she said quietly. "That phrase in the email is why I'm glad you called." I looked up. "You know about the email?" "You mentioned enough to my assistant that I had concerns." I pulled a printed copy from my folder and slid it across her desk. Adrienne read it once, then again. Her expression did not change much, but her jaw tightened. "This is worse than I hoped," she said. That sentence made the room feel smaller. She turned to another page. "You are trustee until Caleb turns 25. That means you control decisions connected to his trust interest. Not Marion, not Preston, not Elaine, not the foundation. You." The word, you, landed hard. For years, Marion had treated me like I was the least qualified adult in any room. Too emotional, too young, too widowed, too outside the Vale bloodline to understand legacy. But Daniel had chosen me. On paper, in advance, in language no one could soften. Adrienne kept going. "The trust interest cannot be sold, pledged, licensed, borrowed against, marketed, represented, or used in connection with charitable solicitation without your written consent." I heard the sentence. Then I heard what it meant. Marion could not use Wren Harbor. She could not promise it to donors. She could not imply Caleb supported it. She could not turn Daniel's favorite place into a Laurel House monument, not without me, and I had signed nothing. Adrienne removed a smaller envelope from the folder. It was cream-colored, sealed once with red wax that had already been broken cleanly, and preserved inside a second protective sleeve. "This is the addendum," she said. My hands went cold. Daniel wrote that? He dictated part of it, then revised the final paragraph himself. Why didn't I know? Because he asked me not to present it unless certain conditions arose. What conditions? Adrienne's eyes moved briefly to the printed email. If a Vale family member attempted to use Caleb's inheritance, image, grief, or Daniel's name in a public-facing campaign without your consent. For a second, I could not speak. Daniel had not just prepared for death. He had prepared for his mother. Adrienne slid the addendum toward me. The language was formal at first. Caleb's name, Daniel's name, the trust, Wren Harbor, consent, limitations, guardian authority. Then came the final paragraph. I knew it before she read it aloud because my eyes found it immediately. My son's inheritance must never be used as proof of another person's virtue. I pressed my fingers to my mouth. Not to cry, to keep from making a sound that would have scared the receptionist outside. Daniel's voice was in that sentence, not the legal voice, his real one. The man who knew boats were honest because they showed you where they were broken. The man who smiled differently at Wren Harbor because Marion did not own that part of him. The man who loved his mother but did not trust her with Caleb's future. Adrienne gave me a moment. I hated needing it. Then she said, "Nora, I need you to listen carefully." I nodded. What Marion appears to be doing is not simply a family matter. If Laurel House used Caleb's image, grief story, or trust-related property to solicit donations while implying services or authorization that did not exist, there could be civil exposure, possibly charitable solicitation violations, possibly donor misrepresentation. But we cannot move on instinct. "I have invoices," I said. "I want to see them. I have donor materials. I want those too." She told everyone I'm unstable. Adrienne leaned back slightly. "That may be relevant." I almost laughed. It came out bitter. "Relevant? If she is building a record that you are too impaired to object or consent, yes, that matters." I thought of the board letter. Not in a season of clear judgment. I thought of Marion's texts. Grief can make small moments feel like rejection. I thought of Elaine's sad little face at the school fundraiser. Mom worries you see things through Daniel's loss. All of it had felt humiliating. Now it looked strategic. Adrienne took notes while I explained everything. The tuition invoice, the donor packet, Caleb's missing photo, the hallway display, the family seating, the release I had never seen. Denise Wu's vanished email address, the way Marion always called instead of writing when it mattered. Adrienne did not interrupt often. When she did, the questions were precise. "Do you have dates? Do you have screenshots? Were any donors present? Was Caleb identifiable? Did Marion request school invoices directly? Did you ever sign a general release? Was Wren Harbor named in any published material?" Each question turned my fear into categories. That helped. Fear is heavy when it has no shape. Evidence gives it edges. After almost 2 hours, Adrienne closed the trust folder, but kept her hand on top of it. "Do not confront Marion." The instruction was so immediate that I looked up. "She is using my son." "I believe she is." "Then why wait?" "Because right now she can still call this confusion, grief, miscommunication, overzealous staff, old photos, shared family understanding. If you confront her too early, she will retreat, rewrite the story, and make you the problem. She is already making me the problem." "Then stop giving her emotional material." I sat back. Adrienne's voice stayed calm. "You need a chain. Not one document. A chain. Proof that Caleb was used. Proof that he was excluded. Proof that Laurel House represented support it did not provide. Proof that Marion knew she needed your authorization. Proof that she did not have it. Proof that she proceeded anyway." I understood chains. In compliance, one bad receipt was a mistake. 5 bad receipts attached to one vendor were a pattern. A pattern tied to approval emails was intent. Intent tied to donor language was exposure. Adrienne was not telling me to endure Marion. She was telling me how to beat her in the only language Marion could not charm: documentation. "What do I do first?" I asked. Adrienne pushed a legal pad across the desk. "Build a timeline. Start from Daniel's death. Every use of Caleb's image, every promise of support, every school invoice, every family event where he was excluded after being used publicly, every communication where Marion questions your judgment. Keep originals. Save metadata. Do not alter files. Forward copies to an email account only you control." I wrote as fast as I could. "What about Denise? Do not contact her repeatedly. One careful message, if any. If she left under pressure, she may come forward when she is ready. We do not want Marion claiming harassment." "What about Wren Harbor?" "I'll pull the property records and trust summary. For now, say nothing about what you know." That was the hardest part. Saying nothing. I had spent years saying nothing because I was weak, polite, grieving, afraid. Now I had to say nothing because I was becoming dangerous. Adrienne opened a drawer and removed a copy of the trust certification. Not the whole trust. Just enough to prove my authority if needed. "This stays with you," she said. "Locked away. Do not send it to Marion unless I tell you." I took it carefully. A piece of paper should not feel like a weapon. This one did. Before I left, I asked the question that had been sitting in my throat since I walked in. Did Daniel think Marion would do this? Adrienne was quiet for a moment. Daniel loved his mother, she said, but he understood her relationship with Legacy. He worried that if something happened to him, Caleb would become either a shrine or an inconvenience. He wanted to prevent both. A shrine or an inconvenience? That was Caleb's entire life with Marion in 6 words. In public, he was Daniel's sacred child. In private, he was Nora's difficult son. I stood in the parking garage afterward, with the trust certification in my purse and the addendum copied in my folder. Cars moved past me. People walked by carrying coffee, dry cleaning, ordinary things. The city kept going as if my world had not shifted under my feet. For the first time, I understood that Marion had been walking toward a locked door. She just did not know Daniel had given me the key. That night, after Caleb fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table and started the timeline Adrienne asked for. I did not write emotionally. I wrote like a witness. Date, event, document, person present. Caleb used publicly. Caleb excluded privately. Money claimed. Money received. Consent requested. Consent given. The last column stayed empty, because I had never given consent. At the top of the first page, I wrote one sentence to keep myself steady. Daniel protected Caleb before I knew Caleb needed protection. Then I opened the case file and made a new folder. Archer Trust. Inside it, I saved the trust certification, Daniel's index card, the wrong email, and a typed note from my meeting with Adrienne. The hidden shield was no longer hidden from me. But Marion still had no idea I had found it. That was the first real advantage I had ever had over her. And this time, I was not going to waste it. After learning about the Archer Trust, I stopped treating Marion's behavior like family pain and started treating it like a paper trail. Every screenshot, invoice, filing, and vendor name became part of a map that showed Laurel House was not just erasing Caleb emotionally, but using money to build Marion's image. Adrienne told me to build a timeline, so I built one. Not in a notebook, not on loose paper. I built it the way I would have built a compliance review for a client who had received restricted education funds and somehow made the receipts smell wrong. I opened a blank spreadsheet at 10:14 on a Tuesday night. Caleb was asleep. The dishwasher was running. Daniel's trust certification sat locked in the small fireproof box under my bed. I named the file Laurel House Timeline. Then I created columns. Date, document, source. Caleb used publicly. Caleb excluded privately. Money referenced. Service actually received. Person responsible. Notes. At first, it felt almost cruel to reduce my son's pain to cells and rows. A missing chair was not just an entry. A removed photo was not just a screenshot. Caleb asking why he was not on the wall anymore was not data. But I had learned something in Adrienne's office. If I kept the story only in my chest, Marion could call it grief. If I put it in order, she had to answer for facts. So I started counting. The first folder was public materials. I downloaded every Laurel House newsletter I could still access. Some were buried in old emails. Some were still live on the website. Some had been forwarded by donors to me years earlier with notes like, "Your Daniel would be so proud." I read them all. The early ones used Caleb heavily. His face, his name, his father's story, his little hands holding shells, his drawing of Wren Harbor. Marion called him our first Laurel House child in 3 separate newsletters. Then slowly, the language changed. By the next year, he became a child in our founding family. Then one family touched by loss. Then nothing. The same pattern repeated with Daniel. At first, Daniel was Caleb's father. Later, he became Marion's son. Then he became our beloved inspiration, detached from the wife and child he left behind. I saved every version as a PDF. I named them by date. No emotion in the file names, just facts. The second folder was website. I used archived pages to find older versions of the Laurel House site. My hands were steady by then. That surprised me. I had expected rage, but what came instead was cold focus. There was Caleb on the first homepage. There was Caleb on the donor page. There was Caleb in the first event gallery. Then came the redesign. His photo vanished. Miles and Henry appeared. Elaine appeared. Marion appeared everywhere. Daniel's portrait stayed, but Caleb's connection to him was erased. I took screenshots with timestamps. I saved the page links. I exported the archived captures. I made a note beside each one. Caleb present. Caleb removed. Twins substituted. Daniel language retained. That mattered. Marion had not erased Daniel. Daniel still raised money. She had only erased Daniel's son when the living child became inconvenient. The third folder was money. That one took longer. Laurel House was a non-profit, so some public filings were available. They were not detailed enough to prove everything, but they were detailed enough to point. Administrative expenses had climbed sharply the year Caleb disappeared from the website. Program spending did not rise in the same way. Fundraising expenses were described with words that sounded harmless until you looked at them closely. Campaign storytelling, legacy development, donor experience, family engagement. Those were the kinds of labels people used when they did not want a line item to say clothing, photography, private events, and image management. I searched vendor names. One invoice reference led to Harborline Design, a coastal architecture and branding firm. Their website showed a portfolio teaser for a private heritage retreat concept outside Charleston. The images were blurred, but I knew the dock. Wren Harbor, the same leaning boathouse, the same curve of marsh grass, the same cedar cottage Daniel loved because Marion did not control it. I took screenshots before the page disappeared. 2 days later, it was gone. That taught me another lesson. I was not the only person cleaning up records. The fourth folder was vendors. I found a portrait photographer who had tagged Laurel House in a post about legacy family imagery. The post showed Marion standing between Miles and Henry near the water, with Daniel's framed photo on a table behind them. The caption thanked the Laurel House Foundation for trusting the studio with such meaningful work. I pulled the photographer's public rate sheet. The package closest to that session started at $9,850. I did not know yet whether Laurel House had paid it, but I saved the rate sheet anyway. Then came the wardrobe consultant. That one almost made me laugh. But not because it was funny. The consultant's website listed Marion as a client in a testimonial. She helped me dress for grief work with dignity, warmth, and authority. Dignity, warmth, and authority. 3 words that probably cost donor money to look natural. I saved that too. The fifth folder was family benefit. Elaine's twins appeared again and again in Laurel House materials. They were called youth ambassadors, legacy readers, junior hosts, art day helpers. I found one donor email describing a youth enrichment partnership connected to their private school. It did not name Miles and Henry directly, but the attached photos did. I had no proof yet that money went to their activities, but the pattern was there. Caleb's grief opened doors. Elaine's boys walked through them. By the end of the first week, my spreadsheet had 143 rows. By the end of the second, it had 219. I stopped sleeping through the night. Not because I was panicking, but because my mind kept arranging documents while my body tried to rest. I would wake at 2 a.m., remembering a newsletter phrase, then get up and search for it. Adrienne checked on me every few days. She did not praise me. I appreciated that. Praise would have made it feel emotional. Instead, she asked practical questions. Do you have the source file? Can you show when that language changed? Was Caleb identifiable? Was money requested on the same page? Can we tie the donor claim to a specific event? Those questions made the work cleaner. I began making evidence maps, the unpaid tuition invoice connected to the donor packet, The donor packet connected to the early newsletters. The newsletters connected to Caleb's image. The image connected to the missing release. The missing release connected to Denise's wrong email. Denise's email connected to Wren Harbor. Wren Harbor connected to the Archer Trust. For the first time, the whole thing had shape, not enough to move yet, enough to know where to push. Adrienne sent the preservation letter in mid-August. It was narrow on purpose. She did not mention the Archer Trust addendum. She did not mention every document I had found. She did not accuse Marion of fraud. She simply requested preservation of all records related to Caleb Whitaker Vail, Daniel Vail, Wren Harbor, donor materials, educational support claims, image permissions, and campaign collateral. It was the legal equivalent of placing one quiet hand on the table. Marion answered through the board chair 4 days later. The response came on Laurel House letterhead. I knew before opening it that Marion had written most of it. The phrasing was too familiar. The foundation expressed appreciation for my continued concern. It said all materials had been used within the family's shared understanding of Daniel's legacy. It said Caleb's privacy had always been respected. It said Laurel House remained committed to children in grief. Then came the sentence Adrienne had predicted. We are mindful that Mrs. Whitaker remains in a grief-impacted season and may not fully recall the permissions and understandings discussed during the early months after Daniel Vail's passing. I read that line once. Then I forwarded it to Adrienne. She called me 10 minutes later. This is useful, she said. Useful? Yes. They put the false narrative in writing. I leaned back in my chair. Marion had done exactly what she always did. She had tried to make me the problem before answering the question. Only this time, she had done it on Foundation letterhead after receiving a legal preservation request. That changed the weight of it. A cruel text was one thing. An official response suggesting I could not remember consent was something else, especially when no signed consent existed. That night, I added a new row to the timeline. Date, August 18th. Document, Board Response to Preservation Letter. Source, Laurel House Foundation. Caleb used publicly, implied. Caleb excluded privately, ongoing. Money referenced, campaign materials. Service actually received, none documented. Person responsible, board chair, likely Marion. Notes. Grief impairment narrative used to imply disputed consent. I stared at that last phrase for a long time. Disputed consent. That was what Marion was building. Not just a social excuse, a legal escape route. If she could convince the board that I had agreed during the fog after Daniel's death, then every missing release became a misunderstanding. Every donor claim became shared family intention. Every use of Caleb's face became something I had allowed and later forgotten, because grief had made me unstable. She was not only erasing Caleb, she was trying to erase my authority as his mother. That was when my anger changed. Before it had been hot, messy, full of things I wanted to say. Now it became something else. Quiet, useful. I printed the board response and placed it in the communications folder. Then I printed a second copy and put it in the binder I kept locked in my desk. On the front of that binder, I wrote a new label. Proof of pattern. Not Marion, not revenge, proof of pattern. Because that was what I had. A pattern of public use. A pattern of private exclusion. A pattern of money claim. A pattern of missing services. A pattern of false concern used to weaken my consent. I did not know yet how far Marion had gone. I did not know about the larger Wren Harbor campaign. I did not know Denise would come back with documents that made my spreadsheet look small. But by the end of that month, I knew this. Marion Vail had built her saintly image out of carefully selected pieces of my son, and piece by piece, I was taking them back. Marion finally stopped hiding behind soft language and asked for the one thing she did not have: my signature. The release form proved she knew Caleb's image, story, and connection to Wren Harbor could not be used without my consent. The release arrived on a Thursday afternoon in October. By then, I had trained myself not to open anything from Marion while standing up. That sounds small, but it mattered. For years, her messages had knocked the air out of me. A text from her could ruin dinner. A voicemail could send me pacing across the kitchen. An email could make me feel like I had failed a test I never agreed to take. So when her name appeared in my inbox, I made myself sit. The subject line was polished. For Daniels Harbor. Time sensitive, not Wren Harbor. Daniels Harbor. That was new. I clicked the email. Marian had written only 5 sentences. She said Laurel House was preparing to announce its most meaningful campaign yet. She said the project would honor Daniel's life, serve grieving children across the Low Country, and bring healing to generations. She said Caleb would be included in a tender and age-appropriate way. She said the attached form was standard. She said she needed it returned by Monday so the board packet could be finalized. Standard. That word has covered more bad behavior than almost any word in the English language. I downloaded the attachment. The file name was image_legacy_release_cav.pdfcav. Caleb Archer Vale. My son had been reduced to initials before I even opened the document. I printed it because I think better on paper. Then I set it on the kitchen table, sharpened a pencil, and started reading like I was being paid to find the problem. The first page was ordinary enough. Permission to use photographs. Permission to use name. Permission to include biographical references. Then it widened. Permission to use personal grief narrative. Permission to use family legacy language. Permission to use images, letters, memories, likenesses, and derivative materials connected to Daniel Vale. I circled derivative materials. Then came the paragraph that made my hands go still. The release granted Laurel House permission to reference Caleb's legacy interest and symbolic connection to Wren Harbor in donor communications, campaign materials, media outreach, and permanent installation displays. Symbolic connection. That was not a casual phrase. That was someone trying to turn legal ownership into emotional decoration. I kept reading. The release also gave Laurel House permission to describe Wren Harbor as the future home of Daniels Harbor, established with the blessing of the Vale family and in the spirit of Daniel's surviving child. The blessing of the Vale family. Not my blessing, not Caleb's legal guardian. The Vale family. I put my pencil down. For a long moment I just looked at the pages. Then I laughed once, not because anything was funny, because after all the soft concern, all the prayers, all the talk about grief and privacy and family understanding, Marian had finally shown me exactly what she needed, my signature. She needed it because she did not have authority. Adrienne had told me to expect this. Still, seeing it in writing changed the temperature of the room. Marian was not only using old photos and vague donor language anymore. She was trying to build a legal bridge after she had already started walking across the water. I scanned the release into the case file. Then I emailed Adrienne. Subject: Release received. I attached the PDF and wrote one sentence: I have not signed and will not sign without your review. Adrienne called 22 minutes later. Do not sign this. I wasn't going to. I know, I'm saying it out loud anyway. What is she doing? She is trying to retroactively create consent. I looked at the release again. Retroactively. Yes. If this campaign is already in motion, she needs your signature to make everything look authorized. The language is too broad. The Wren Harbor section is especially concerning. She called it symbolic. She would. Can I tell her no? Not yet. Say council needs to review it. Keep it neutral. I wanted to object. I wanted to send Marian 2 words. Absolutely not. But Adrienne was right. If I refused too sharply, Marian would slow down, revise, or claim she had misunderstood. If I stayed neutral, she might keep talking. So I replied carefully, Marian, I received the release. Because it references Caleb's image, Daniel's materials, and Wren Harbor, I need counsel to review it before I can respond. Please do not use Caleb's name, image, or story in any new materials until review is complete. I read it 3 times. Then I pressed send. Marian called 6 minutes later. I watched the phone ring. My whole body wanted to answer and defend Caleb. Instead, I let it go to voicemail. Then I remembered what Adrienne had said about one-party consent in South Carolina. I called her office to confirm again. She confirmed. I could record a conversation I was part of. So when Marion called a second time, I pressed record on the app Adrian had recommended and answered on speaker. "Nora," Marion said, with that careful brightness she used when she wanted the room to think she was patient. "I'm sure this is simply a misunderstanding." "What part?" "The release. It is standard. It references Wren Harbor." "Of course it does. Daniel loved Wren Harbor." "That doesn't explain why Caleb's legacy interest is in the document." There was a small pause. Not long, but enough. "Sweetheart," she said, "you are getting caught in language." I wrote that down while she spoke. Caught in language. That was what people said when language had caught them first. "I asked counsel to review it," I said. "We do not need to involve outside people in family healing. It involves Caleb's image. It involves Daniel's legacy. It involves property." Another pause. Then Marion's voice changed by half a degree, still soft, less warm. "Donors have already been told Caleb supports the campaign." There it was. I kept my voice steady. "Caleb is 9. He understands his father loved that place. He cannot support a real estate campaign. Nora, please do not make this ugly." That phrase again. Ugly to Marion meant visible. "Nobody is making it ugly," I said. "I'm asking you not to use my son without permission. You gave permission in spirit years ago." "No." "You sent photographs. For early Laurel House materials, not for this. You allowed Caleb to be part of Daniel's story. He is Daniel's son. He is not foundation collateral." The silence after that was different. I had named the thing too accurately. When Marion spoke again, the sweetness was strained. "This is exactly the instability I have tried to protect him from." I almost answered. I almost said, "There it is. There you are." But I did not. I let the silence hold. She filled it. "Your grief has made you suspicious of people trying to do good. Daniel would be heartbroken to see you blocking something meant to help children." There was the guilt. Daniel, children, goodness, the holy trinity of Marion's pressure tactics. I wrote down every phrase. "I'm not blocking help for children," I said. "I'm asking for legal review. You always hide behind process when you are afraid of family." That sentence landed differently because of my work. Process was not hiding. Process was how honest people proved they were honest. "I'm ending this call now," I said. "Nora, please put any further requests in writing." I hung up before she could take control of the ending. Then I sat very still. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from containment. I had let Marion talk. I had let her confirm the donors had already been told Caleb supported the campaign. I had let her say I gave permission in spirit. I had let her call me unstable in the same conversation where she pressured me to sign a release she clearly needed. That recording became the first audio file in my case file. I labeled it, "Marion Release Pressure Call, October 12th. Then I transcribed it, word for word, no commentary, no adjectives, no interpretation, just the words. When I sent the transcript to Adrian, she replied with only one line. "This helps establish knowledge." Knowledge. That was the legal word hiding inside the emotional mess. Marion knew she did not have my signed consent. Marion knew Caleb was a child. Marion knew Wren Harbor required more than family sentiment. And Marion knew donors had already been told a version of the story that was not true. That evening, Caleb found the thank you card stationery in the drawer and asked if he should write Marion a note for the upcoming gala. I had not told him about the release. I had not told him about the call. He only knew Marion had invited him to something for his father. "What do you want to say?" I asked. He shrugged. "Thank you for remembering Daddy." My throat tightened. There are moments when you realize a child is still offering love to someone who is already using it. I wanted to take the stationery away. I wanted to tell him Marion did not deserve his careful handwriting. Instead, I sat beside him. "Write what feels true," I said. He nodded and bent over the card. His letters were slow, careful, full of hope. Across town, Marion was planning a campaign that needed my son's face, my husband's memory, and a property she did not control. At my kitchen table, Caleb was writing thank you. That was the difference between them. One of them still believed family meant love. The other believed family meant access. By the end of the week, Marion sent 2 follow-up emails, each more polished than the last. She copied the board chair on the second one. She wrote that Laurel House could not delay donor deadlines because I was seeking unnecessary outside review. She wrote that she hoped I would not allow fear to interrupt Daniel's healing work. I forwarded everything to Adrian. Then I added 3 new rows to the timeline. Release received, consent withheld, pressure applied. For the first time, Marion had stepped out of implication and into documented need. She needed my signature. She did not have it, and she had just admitted the campaign was already moving without it. Just when I thought I had gathered everything I could find on my own, the woman behind the wrong email reached out. Denise Wu didn't come back because she suddenly became brave. She came back because Marion had finally crossed a line that Denise could no longer justify to herself. I had almost stopped expecting to hear from Denise. Weeks had passed since the wrong email landed in my inbox. Her Laurel House account had already been disabled before I replied. Adrienne had warned me not to chase her. If she's frightened, Adrienne had said, pressure will only push her back toward Marion. So I waited. Waiting turned out to be harder than investigating. When you're collecting documents, your hands have something to do. You sort, you compare, you highlight, you organize. Waiting leaves you alone with your thoughts. By then, my timeline had grown to hundreds of entries. Every evening, I added another document. Every morning, I checked public filings. Marion continued preparing the Daniels Harbor campaign as though my refusal to sign the release had merely delayed an inevitable victory. She was behaving like someone who believed time was on her side. That confidence bothered Adrienne more than it bothered me. People don't usually spend money this aggressively, she said one afternoon, unless they believe the paperwork will eventually catch up. Those words stayed with me. Eventually catch up. Meaning Marion wasn't waiting for permission. She was spending as though permission already existed. 3 days later, my phone buzzed while I was reviewing a grant reimbursement file for work. The number wasn't saved. The area code was local. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered, "Mrs. Whitaker?" The woman's voice was quiet, careful. "I hope this isn't inappropriate." I already knew. "Denise?" A long pause. "Yes." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, she said, "I don't think we should talk on the phone." "All right. I've been contacted by an attorney." My heartbeat slowed. "Adrienne?" "Yes." Another silence. Then Denise whispered something that changed everything. I didn't know what Marion was doing until it was too late. I closed my office door. "Can we meet?" "I'll only meet if your attorney is there." "She will be." "And..." She stopped. "I need you to understand something." "What?" "I wasn't fired." "You weren't?" "I resigned." That surprised me. Then she added quietly, "They wanted everyone to think I was fired." We met 2 days later in Adrienne's conference room. Denise looked younger than I expected, mid-30s. Dark hair pulled into a loose knot, no makeup. She carried an ordinary canvas tote bag that looked far too small to hold the weight she had been carrying. She sat down carefully, keeping both hands around a paper coffee cup she never drank from. Adrienne didn't begin with questions. She began with reassurance. "You are not under oath today." Denise nodded. "You may stop at any time." Another nod. Then Adrienne simply asked, "When did you first become concerned?" Denise stared at the table. "Not when I should have." Her voice shook. "I thought Laurel House was different." So did I. I believed Marion. So did I. That made Denise look up for the first time. There was relief in her eyes. Not because I agreed, because I understood. "I handled bookkeeping," she said. I wasn't involved in programming. I wasn't making decisions. I just processed records. She opened her tote bag. Inside were 3 thick, expanding folders: blue, green, red. She lined them up on the conference table. I made copies before I resigned. Adrian didn't touch them immediately. Why? Denise swallowed. Because every time I asked a question, someone told me I didn't understand the vision. That sentence sounded painfully familiar. Marian had always replaced answers with feelings. Denise opened the blue folder. Spreadsheets, general ledger exports, restricted fund summaries, donation tracking reports. She slid one page toward us. I highlighted the entries I couldn't reconcile. Across the top was a project code, WH-01. What does that mean? I asked. Wren Harbor. My chest tightened. Denise nodded. It became the internal code after the campaign was renamed Daniels Harbor. She pointed lower on the page. Restricted gifts, current balance, allocated, committed. The total made my stomach turn. $312,487.16. I looked at Adrian. She looked back at Denise. These are restricted donations? Yes. For Wren Harbor? Yes. Were they authorized? Denise hesitated. I assumed they were. What changed? Denise reached into the green folder. Emails, printed one after another. She found one already marked with a yellow tab. It was from Marian. Subject: Campaign Timeline. One sentence had been highlighted. Once Nora signs, we can finalize public language and donor acknowledgments. I stared at it. Once Nora signs. Not if. Once. Marian wasn't hoping for consent. She had scheduled around it. The campaign had been built on the assumption that eventually I would give in. Adrian asked quietly, when was this sent? 3 weeks before the release went to Mrs. Whitaker. 3 weeks, meaning donor planning had already begun. Money had already started moving, before Marian even asked me. Adrian made a note, then another. Denise opened the red folder. This part bothered me most. Inside were reimbursement reports, expense approvals, internal budget adjustments. Nothing dramatic at first glance. Then Denise slid one report toward me. Program enhancement, Youth Ambassador Development, amount, $41,600. What program? Denise looked at me sadly. There wasn't one. What was it? She turned the page. Private sailing instruction, custom uniforms, photography, travel, summer leadership retreat. Every receipt carried the same participant names: Miles Mercer, Henry Mercer, Elaine's twins. I felt something inside me go completely still. Laurel House had told donors they were helping grieving children. Meanwhile, foundation money had paid for sailing lessons and image-building activities for Marian's preferred grandchildren. Not Caleb. Never Caleb. Denise kept talking. It wasn't illegal to spend money on youth programming. No. But these expenses were coded under grief outreach. She handed me another spreadsheet. The coding trail was obvious once she explained it. Real grief counseling, tiny. Educational continuity, almost non-existent. Marketing, photography, donor cultivation, leadership image, growing every quarter. I suddenly understood why my compliance instincts had been so uncomfortable. The numbers weren't random, they were intentional. Adrian asked the next question. Who approved these reallocations? Denise didn't answer immediately. Instead, she removed one final document, a board packet draft, not the final version. The draft. Sections had been edited in red. Marian's handwritten notes appeared in the margins. One sentence had been crossed out. Replace pending authorization with family approval anticipated. I looked up. She changed it herself? Denise nodded. She hated words that sounded uncertain. Adrian asked, did the board know authorization hadn't been obtained? I don't think so. What makes you say that? Denise opened another email. This one came from Board Chair Margaret Ellison. It thanked Marian for confirming that family paperwork was nearly complete. Nearly complete. Not complete. Marion had never corrected the assumption. She simply allowed everyone to believe my signature was coming. Every decision after that had been made on borrowed certainty. I leaned back slowly. For months, I had believed Marion was manipulating people. Now I saw something worse. She was allowing good people to make decisions based on information she knew was incomplete. That wasn't misunderstanding. That was intent. Denise's voice became quieter. I resigned after the release wasn't signed. You knew? Yes. I asked whether the campaign should pause. What did Marion say? Denise closed her eyes briefly. She said, Nora always comes around once she calms down. The room fell silent. Adrienne didn't interrupt. Neither did I. Denise continued. Then Marion said something else. She looked directly at me. I've never forgotten it. What? The paperwork exists to support the vision. The vision doesn't wait for paperwork. Even Adrienne stopped writing. That sentence explained everything. Why donor materials existed before consent. Why money had already been designated. Why the release sounded retroactive. Why Marion kept pushing instead of stopping. She genuinely believed her moral certainty outranked legal authority. Denise slid the last document across the table. It was a resignation letter. Typed, signed, short. At the bottom, someone had handwritten one sentence. Accepted. Effective immediately. Signed by Marion. I couldn't stay, Denise whispered. I kept telling myself the paperwork would eventually match the story. It never did. Adrienne finally gathered the folders into neat stacks. We'll need copies. You can have everything. Original metadata too? Denise nodded. I brought the external drive. She reached into her bag one last time. A small black USB drive landed softly on the conference table. It looked insignificant. It wasn't. Inside were accounting exports, original emails, revision histories, board drafts, approval chains, electronic timestamps. The documents didn't simply support my suspicions. They explained Marion's strategy. She wasn't improvising. She had been building Daniels Harbor for months under the assumption that legal consent would eventually arrive. When it didn't, she kept spending anyway. Adrienne looked at me after Denise left. For the first time, she said quietly, we have evidence of knowledge. I nodded. No, she smiled slightly. More than knowledge. What? Intent. I understood the distinction immediately. The unpaid tuition invoice proved something was wrong. The trust proved Marion lacked authority. The release proved she knew she needed my consent. Denise's documents proved she moved forward anyway. That changed everything. Adrienne enclosed the folders carefully. I can seek an injunction now. Not because we had a theory, because we finally had a chain. Every document connected to the next. Every decision led to another. Every assumption pointed in the same direction. The evidence no longer described isolated acts of cruelty. It described a deliberate plan. As I drove home that afternoon, I kept thinking about Denise. People imagine whistleblowers as fearless. She wasn't. She was frightened. She was exhausted. She had simply reached the point where telling the truth cost less than continuing the lie. When I pulled into my driveway, Caleb was waiting on the porch with his backpack beside him. He smiled the moment he saw my car. For months, I had been gathering documents to protect his future. That afternoon, for the first time, I believed we actually could. Not because Marion had become weaker, but because the truth had finally found another witness. Adrienne shows me that winning is no longer about exposing Marion emotionally. It is about allowing her to complete the deception herself in front of the right people at the right moment, with every document, witness, and legal safeguard already in place. The hardest instruction Adrienne ever gave me wasn't to collect evidence. It wasn't to stay quiet. It wasn't even to stop defending myself. It was this. Let Marion think she's winning. I hated those words. I hated them because they required something grief had already exhausted inside me. Patience. For nearly 4 years, I had watched Marion slowly rewrite my son's place inside his own family. Every month she seemed to take one more inch, one more photograph, one more memory, one more piece of Daniel's story. Now that we finally had proof, every instinct inside me wanted to stop her immediately. Instead, Adrian closed the blue litigation folder and looked directly at me. "If we move today," she said, "we'll stop one campaign." She paused. "If we wait for Marion to complete the representation herself, we stop all the campaigns that come after it." There was a difference, a legal difference, one I was only beginning to understand. The conference room whiteboard soon filled with dates instead of emotions. October 12th, release sent. October 18th, consent withheld. October 24th, Denise resignation. November 2nd, board packet finalized. November 15th, annual Laurel House Winter Gala. Adrian circled the final date. "This," she said quietly, "is where Marion believes she'll win." She wasn't guessing. Denise's internal emails had already revealed the campaign schedule. The gala would introduce Daniels Harbor publicly. Major donors would attend. City officials would attend. The foundation board would vote immediately afterward to authorize the first construction phase. Press would be present. Marion had chosen the biggest room possible. She had also unknowingly chosen the worst possible place to lie. Adrian spread another stack of documents across the table. "I don't want surprises," she said, "so we remove as many variables as possible." For the next 3 hours, we didn't talk about feelings once. We talked about logistics. Who would be there? Where they would sit? When Marion normally gave her keynote? When donor pledges were announced? Where photographers stood? Which doors hotel security controlled? How process servers entered public charity events? It felt less like preparing for a lawsuit and more like preparing for an operation. Every movement had a reason. Every person had a purpose. Adrian assigned each piece of evidence to a specific legal question. The tuition invoices established false educational support claims. The donor brochure established public representations. The release proved Marion knew authorization was required. The recorded phone call proved she knew authorization had not been given. The Archer Trust established legal authority. Denise's spreadsheets established financial intent. The board drafts established reliance. Nothing stood alone anymore. Every document answered the weakness of another. That was the chain. And chains don't break because one link looks emotional. They hold because every link connects. Adrienne turned to me. "You are no longer collecting evidence." "What am I doing?" "Protecting its admissibility." That sentence changed the way I handled everything afterward. No more highlighting originals. No handwritten notes on documents. Every screenshot saved with metadata. Every recording copied twice. Every email exported instead of printed. Every photograph stored with the original timestamp. Every conversation summarized immediately afterward with date, location, and participants. Years of compliance work suddenly became useful in ways I had never imagined. I wasn't building a family scrapbook. I was preserving evidence. 2 days later, Adrian introduced me to someone I hadn't expected. Martin Harlan. Everyone called him Mr. Harlan. He was 71 years old, owned a regional shipping company, and had quietly donated to Laurel House since its first fundraiser. I recognized his name immediately. His company logo appeared in almost every annual report. He wasn't there because he disliked Marion. Quite the opposite. He admired her. Or at least he had. Mr. Harlan sat across from us wearing a navy blazer and reading glasses balanced low on his nose. "I gave Marion nearly $400,000 over 4 years, he said matter-of-factly. I believed every word. There was no anger in his voice, only disappointment. Adrian explained the documents without editorializing. The tuition records, the donor language, the unsigned release, the trust, Denise's accounting files. Mr. Harlan didn't interrupt. When Adrian finished, he removed his glasses slowly. "Are you telling me?" That little boy paid his own tuition? I answered quietly. I did. And we were told the foundation had stabilized his education. Yes. He looked down for a long moment. Then he asked the question Adrian had been waiting for. If Marion repeats those representations publicly, while seeking donations, would that matter? Adrian nodded. It would matter significantly. Mr. Harlan folded his hands. Then I'll be there. He wasn't joining my side. He was simply agreeing to witness the truth. That distinction mattered. The following week, Adrienne contacted the Palmetto Grand Hotel's legal department. Not to warn them, to protect them. She explained that legal process might occur during a public charitable event. She requested that security preserve surveillance footage beginning 1 hour before the gala and ending 1 hour afterward. No accusations, no dramatic language, just preservation. The hotel's director of security agreed. He also assigned one supervisor to document any disputes involving seating, access, or removal requests. Another quiet safeguard. Another future witness. Then came the evidence packets. I expected binders. Adrienne prepared 12 identical folders instead. Cream covers, simple labels, no emotional language. Each packet contained exactly the same sequence. Timeline, public materials, educational records, trust certification, release request, recorded call transcript, financial summaries, relevant emails, Denise's sworn declaration, supporting exhibits. Every document was tabbed, every page numbered, every citation cross-referenced. I watched Adrienne assemble them one by one. Who gets these? The board. Donors? Selected ones. The Attorney General's investigator if necessary. The Foundation's counsel. The court. She smiled faintly. And one stays with me. Preparation looked surprisingly ordinary. Colored tabs, paper clips, page numbers. Nothing dramatic, until you realized each packet represented years of Marion's decisions. One afternoon, Caleb found me organizing copies across the dining room table. What are you working on? I looked at him. Paper suddenly felt too heavy. Just grown-up paperwork. He nodded, then asked the question I'd been afraid of. Are we still going to Grandma's big party? I didn't answer immediately, because I honestly didn't know. After he went outside to throw a baseball against the fence, I called Adrienne. I don't want him there. I know. Then let's not go. If you don't attend, Marion adjusts. I don't care. You will. She let the silence settle before continuing. If Marion publicly announces Daniels Harbor without Caleb present, she'll tell everyone you're isolating him. If Caleb is there, she'll almost certainly use him. I know. I closed my eyes. What would you do? Adrienne's answer came slowly. I would never ask you to expose Caleb to unnecessary pain. She stopped. But I also won't pretend this decision has no cost. That night I barely slept. I walked into Caleb's room sometime after midnight. The hallway light barely reached his bed. He had kicked one blanket onto the floor. Daniel's old blazer still rested over the chair beside his desk, not because he slept with it anymore, because he liked seeing it. Proof. That's what it had become. Proof that his father had existed. I sat beside his bed and realized what made the decision so difficult. The gala wasn't dangerous because Marion might insult me. She had done that for years. It was dangerous because she might hurt Caleb one more time. And I would have to let her. Not because I accepted it, because the truth had to become undeniable. The next morning I made my decision. I called Adrienne. We'll go. She didn't celebrate. She simply said, then we prepare. Preparation became almost military. Caleb would never leave my side. We would arrive separately from the board. Mr. Harlan would already be seated. Hotel security would know my name. The process server would wait outside until instructed. Adrienne would remain unseen unless Marion crossed the legal line. No improvisation. No emotional confrontation, no shouting, no surprises, only sequence. Because that's what Marian had never understood. She believed confidence won public rooms. Adrienne believed preparation did. 3 days before the gala, Marian sent one final email. She wrote that she was thrilled Caleb would finally see the beautiful future being built in his father's honor. I read the sentence twice, then saved it. She still believed Daniel's Harbor belonged to her story. She still believed my silence meant surrender. She still believed the release would eventually become irrelevant. She had mistaken patience for weakness. That misunderstanding was about to become the most expensive mistake of her life. On the evening before the gala, I placed 12 evidence packets into a canvas document case. Then I checked the Archer Trust certification one last time. Not because I doubted it, because tomorrow every piece of evidence would finally stand in the same room. The truth no longer depended on memory. It depended on sequence. And for the first time since Daniel died, sequence was on my side. The night of the Laurel House Winter Gala finally arrives. Caleb discovers that he has been placed at the center of Marian's fundraising campaign while being deliberately excluded from her family. In one carefully orchestrated evening, Marian completes the public hypocrisy that the evidence has been building toward for years. The ballroom looked exactly the way Marian wanted people to remember her. Elegant, generous, timeless. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across white linen tables. Hundreds of candles reflected off polished silver. Every centerpiece was filled with white garden roses, Daniel's favorite flower, even though he had always joked they were too expensive for people who actually liked dirt under their fingernails. Nothing inside that room had been chosen by Daniel. Everything inside that room had been chosen to make people believe they remembered him. I parked across the street from the Palmetto Grand Hotel and sat in the car for a full minute before turning off the engine. Caleb was beside me wearing Daniel's navy blazer. He had grown into it a little more since the last time. The sleeves still hung slightly long, but not enough to look borrowed anymore. He carefully smoothed the brass buttons with his thumb. "I think Dad would have liked this place tonight," he said. I looked at him. "I think he would have liked being with you." He smiled. That quiet, hopeful smile still had the power to break my heart. Because he was walking into a room full of people who loved the story of Daniel more than the son Daniel had left behind. Before we crossed the street, I knelt beside him. "Remember something for me." "What?" "No matter what happens tonight, you stay beside me." He looked surprised. "I wasn't going anywhere." "I know. But promise anyway." "I promise." Those 3 words mattered more than he realized. Across the lobby, I noticed Adrienne before she noticed me. She was sitting alone near the hotel cafe, reading what looked like a legal journal. She never looked up. That meant everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Near the registration table, I spotted Martin Harlan speaking quietly with another longtime donor. He gave me the smallest nod. Nothing more. No alliance. No performance, just acknowledgement. Near the ballroom entrance, a hotel security supervisor checked a clipboard and discreetly looked toward us before writing something down. Another piece was already in place. No one watching would have noticed. That was the point. Inside the ballroom, a massive illuminated display filled the far wall. The Daniel's Harbor Campaign. Below the title stretched artist renderings of renovated cottages, children's art studios, therapy gardens, walking trails, and restored docks overlooking the marsh. Everything looked peaceful, hopeful, expensive. At the very center stood a 12-foot donor wall. Hundreds of engraved names already covered polished glass panels. Between them were large photographs, children painting, families embracing, counselors reading books. Then Caleb stopped walking, his eyes fixed on one enormous photograph. It was him, 6 years old, laughing on Daniel's shoulders at Wren Harbor. Exactly the same photograph from Marian's earliest brochure, only larger, much larger, almost life-size. Beneath it, elegant gold lettering read, "The child whose courage inspired Daniel's Harbor." Caleb stared at himself. then quietly asked, "When did they take that picture?" "They didn't." "What do you mean?" "It was an old photograph." He looked back at the wall. "I look little." "You were." He nodded slowly. For several seconds, he simply stood there studying his own younger face. I wondered what children think when they see themselves transformed into symbols. Probably something simpler than adults imagine. Probably, why didn't anyone ask me? We moved toward the front tables. Volunteers in matching Laurel House scarves welcomed guests with practiced smiles. One young woman checked us in. She found my name immediately. Then her smile faded. She looked down again, scrolled, looked back up. "I'm terribly sorry." She searched once more. "I don't seem to have a seating assignment for Caleb." I already knew. Still, hearing someone else say it hurt differently. "Could you check again?" She did. Then another volunteer came over. Then a supervisor. Finally, the supervisor smiled apologetically. "Children participating in tonight's tribute are seated downstairs in the youth experience room until the presentation." Caleb looked at me. "But I'm with you." "I know." The supervisor continued politely. "After Mrs. Vale's keynote, we'll bring him upstairs for photographs." Photographs. Again. Visible when useful. Hidden the rest of the night. Before I could answer, Marian appeared. She moved through the crowd effortlessly, greeting donors by first name, touching shoulders lightly, accepting compliments with perfectly measured humility. She reached us wearing ivory silk and Daniel's old Naval Academy pin on her lapel. The symbolism was deliberate. Everything with Marian was deliberate. "Nora." She kissed the air beside my cheek, then looked at Caleb. "My handsome boy." She adjusted Daniel's blazer collar as if claiming it. "I'm so happy you came." Caleb smiled politely. "I wrote you another card." "Oh, sweetheart." She touched his hand. "We'll look at it later." She never took it. Instead, she turned toward the volunteers. "Would one of you take Caleb downstairs?" I answered before they could move. "No." Marian blinked once. Only once. "He belongs with me. The youth program has already been arranged. He was invited as family. He was invited because he represents Daniel's story." There it was. Small, quiet, almost invisible. But she had said it. Represents, not belongs. I kept my voice level. "He stays with me." Marian smiled for anyone watching nearby. "Nora." "Please don't create discomfort." The same script, different evening. I shook my head. "No." Around us, conversations continued. No scene, no raised voices. Just two women speaking softly while a 9-year-old held a folded thank you card. Marian leaned slightly closer. "This section is reserved." "I can see that." "The Vale family has assigned seating." "I noticed." She glanced toward the volunteer, then back at me. "Caleb will be more comfortable with the other children." Before I could respond, Caleb quietly asked, "Where are Miles and Henry sitting?" Marian pointed toward the front row, directly beneath the stage. 2 place cards rested beside hers. Miles Mercer, Henry Mercer. Next to them sat one reading, "Reserved, family, nothing for Caleb." He followed her gesture silently, then looked down at the place card still folded in his own hand. Not the thank you card. The escort card the volunteer had finally printed. It simply read, "Youth Program." No surname, no table number, no family designation, just Youth Program. He understood. Not all of it. Enough. Children always know when they have been sorted. He looked back toward the donor wall. His own photograph towered above hundreds of guests. Then he looked toward the front row, where there wasn't a chair for him. His voice came quietly. "So, I'm important over there." He pointed toward the giant photograph. "But not over here." He pointed toward the family table. No one answered immediately, because there wasn't an answer, only truth. Marian recovered first. She bent down until her face was level with Caleb's. "Sweetheart, tonight isn't about where people sit. It's about honoring your father's legacy." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. then asked the question no adult in the room wanted to hear. If it's Dad's legacy, why aren't I sitting with Dad's family? The volunteer beside us stopped breathing. One donor slowly lowered his wine glass. Across the ballroom, I saw Mr. Harlan remove a small leather notebook from his pocket. He began writing. Not dramatically, methodically, exactly as Adrian hoped he would. Marian's smile tightened. You are part of your mother's healing journey. There it was. The phrase, spoken publicly again. But tonight, we celebrate the true Vale legacy. True. One word, one devastating word. Caleb didn't cry. He didn't argue. He simply looked at the enormous photograph of himself smiling on Daniel's shoulders, then back toward the empty place where a family chair should have been. The realization reached him before anyone else spoke. His picture belonged. He did not. I felt his small hand slide into mine, not gripping, just holding. I squeezed gently. I'm staying with Mom. His voice was calm, certain. I promised. Marian looked irritated for the first time all evening. Not because Caleb had refused, because he had refused politely. She couldn't call it misbehavior. She couldn't call it instability. She couldn't even call it disrespect. A hotel security supervisor quietly wrote another entry on his clipboard. Time, location, nature of interaction, exactly as requested. Across the room, Denise had quietly entered through a side door with Adrian. She wasn't participating, she was observing. Another witness, another set of eyes, another person who knew exactly what Marian had planned. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the master of ceremonies approached the podium. The program was beginning. Marian smiled once more for the photographers before walking toward the stage. She believed she had already handled the only obstacle that mattered. She believed Caleb had been positioned exactly where she wanted him, visible enough to soften hearts, invisible enough not to complicate the narrative. She never realized something fundamental had changed. This time, every chair, every photograph, every word, every attempt to separate my son from me had been witnessed, not just by me, by the very people she hoped would applaud her. The chain was complete. All that remained was for Marian to finish telling her version of the story, and that part, she was more than willing to do herself. The gala was only the beginning. The real consequences came afterward, when every document, every witness, and every false statement left the ballroom and entered the legal system. Marian had spent years protecting her reputation. She never imagined that reputation would become the first thing she lost. People often imagine justice as one dramatic moment, one verdict, one speech, one person finally admitting they were wrong. That isn't what happened. Justice arrived the way most audits do, quietly, methodically, one document at a time. 3 days after the gala, the circuit court granted Adrian's request for a temporary injunction. Construction related to Daniels Harbor stopped immediately. No donor funds connected to the campaign could be spent. No new fundraising materials could be distributed. No additional representations involving Caleb, Wren Harbor, Daniels Estate, or the Archer Trust could be made until further review. When Adrian called with the news, she didn't celebrate. The judge agreed the status quo has to be preserved. That was enough. For the first time since Daniel died, Marian no longer controlled the timeline. The following week, the Charities Division of the Attorney General's office formally requested Laurel House's records. Not because of rumors, not because of social media. Because the court filings, Denise's declaration, the preservation materials, and the donor representations created enough concern to justify an official inquiry. The request was extensive. Board minutes, campaign drafts, donation records, vendor contracts, accounting files, internal emails, image permissions, every version of the Daniels Harbor proposal. Adrian smiled for the first time in weeks when she read the request. They're asking the right questions. Marian answered publicly before she answered legally. She released a carefully worded statement, claiming Laurel House welcomed transparency and had always operated with compassion and integrity. She described the dispute as a private family misunderstanding during an extended period of grief. Under different circumstances, people might have believed her. This time they couldn't. Too many documents already existed. Too many witnesses had seen the gala. Too many donors had received the correction packet. The facts had escaped her control. The Laurel House Board held an emergency meeting the following Monday. For years, Marian had chaired those meetings from the head of a polished walnut table. This time she was asked to step outside while independent counsel reviewed the materials. She had never imagined becoming the topic instead of the chair. Margaret Ellison called me 2 days later. Her voice sounded older than I remembered. "I owe you an apology." She didn't defend herself. She didn't defend Marian. She simply admitted what the documents showed. "We believed authorization was coming." "I know. We should have verified it." "Yes. We trusted the wrong person." I thanked her. Not because an apology repaired anything, because accountability begins with truth. By the end of the month, Marian resigned as president of Laurel House. The official announcement called it a voluntary decision made in the foundation's best interests. No one believed that. The board simultaneously announced an independent governance review and appointed interim leadership. Her name disappeared from the website within 24 hours. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had erased Caleb one photograph at a time. Now the organization erased her in a single afternoon. The financial consequences came next. Independent accountants reviewed the campaign expenditures Denise had identified. Some expenses were legitimate, many weren't. Restricted donations had been used for costs unrelated to the representations made to donors. Youth ambassador expenses benefiting Miles and Henry could not be supported under the campaign descriptions. Portrait sessions, wardrobe consulting, private sailing-related programming, legacy branding costs. Each category had to be reclassified. Several expenditures had to be repaid. Marian wasn't accused of stealing cash and hiding it in offshore accounts. The truth was less dramatic and somehow more disturbing. She had convinced herself that anything strengthening her vision served the mission. The law disagreed. Donors did too. Martin Harlan withdrew the final installment of his pledge. Others followed. Some redirected their gifts to children's grief programs with no connection to Laurel House. Others suspended giving altogether until the investigation concluded. Within 6 weeks, nearly $2 million in expected campaign commitments disappeared. The Daniels Harbor project never broke ground. One afternoon, I drove past Wren Harbor. The marsh looked exactly the way it always had. The tide ignored lawsuits. The gulls ignored reputations. Daniels Dock still leaned slightly to the left. I sat there for nearly an hour, not because I felt victorious, because I finally knew it would stay what Daniel wanted it to be, a place, not a monument. The investigation also uncovered something I hadn't fully understood. Elaine hadn't simply accepted the advantages her boys received. She had approved reimbursement requests connected to several youth ambassador activities. Emails showed she knew those benefits were funded through campaign accounts connected to Daniels Harbor. She hadn't designed the system. She had benefited from it. When questioned, she insisted she trusted Marian completely. I believed that. Trust can become its own excuse. It just isn't always a legal defense. The board publicly corrected earlier donor materials. The correction wasn't dramatic. No headlines, no press conference. Just a formal notice acknowledging that previous campaign descriptions concerning educational support, family authorization, and certain legacy representations required clarification. I read every word. It never mentioned my name. It didn't need to. The documents had already spoken for me. Friends I hadn't heard from in years suddenly called. Some apologized for believing Marian's version. Some admitted they never questioned why Caleb slowly disappeared from family events. Others simply said they were sorry. I accepted every sincere apology. Holding anger after the truth was established felt like carrying boxes after moving into the new house. Heavy for no reason. Marian tried one last time. Through another attorney, she suggested mediation. Not about the trust. Not about Wren Harbor. About restoring family harmony. Adrian read the letter once and handed it to me. You don't owe anyone a performance of reconciliation. I folded it and placed it in the file. I never answered. The court eventually incorporated the Archer Trust protections into agreed orders governing Wren Harbor and Caleb's interests. Future use of Caleb's name, image, likeness, personal story, or trust-related property required my written authorization as trustee. No assumptions, no implied family approval, no symbolic consent. Written authority, exactly as Daniel intended. The final loss for Marion wasn't financial. It wasn't legal. It wasn't even social. It was moral. Speaking invitations quietly disappeared. A regional magazine postponed a profile celebrating her philanthropic leadership and never published it. Organizations that once asked her to keynote fundraising events suddenly found other speakers. People still recognized her. They simply no longer introduced her as the woman who built Laurel House. They introduced her as someone connected to that foundation controversy. For Marion, reputation had always been currency. Watching it dissolve was harder for her than writing repayment checks. As for Caleb, the family visits stopped. Not because I forbade them, because no one asked. Months later, he looked at me one evening while we were cleaning fishing gear after a weekend at Wren Harbor. "Do you think Grandma misses me?" I thought carefully before answering. "I think she misses the story she wanted." He nodded slowly, then asked, "What about me?" I wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "I think the people who truly know you won't ever confuse you with a story again." That answer felt honest. For the first time in years, honesty was enough. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, deeply tired. The kind of tired that comes after carrying something far longer than anyone realizes. But underneath that exhaustion was something I hadn't felt since Daniel was alive. Peace. Not because everything had been repaired, because the truth no longer depended on me defending it. It could stand on its own. And after years of watching Marion build her world on carefully chosen appearances, that quiet, documented truth became the strongest foundation Caleb and I had ever been given. Winning in court did not erase what happened to Caleb. Real healing began only after the lawsuits ended, when we stopped organizing our lives around Marion's approval and started building a future Daniel would have recognized as our own. People ask me sometimes when everything finally felt over. They expect me to mention the injunction, or the board vote, or the settlement, or the day Marion resigned. Those moments mattered, but none of them were the ending. Court orders protect rights. They don't heal children. That work happens much more quietly. Almost 6 months after the gala, I found the old escort card tucked inside the front pocket of my case binder. The cheap cream cardstock had curled slightly with time. The black lettering was still perfectly clear. Youth program. No last name, no family table, no place beside his father, just a polite way of telling a little boy where he belonged. For a long time, I simply looked at it. Then I slipped it into a clear plastic sleeve and placed it beside another document. The final settlement. The Archer Trust certification. The court order protecting Caleb's name, image, likeness, and inheritance. Daniel's handwritten note. The unsigned release. Marion's voicemail transcript. Denise's declaration. Years of pain reduced to organized paper. I closed the binder. Not because I wanted to forget, because I finally didn't need to carry it every day. Spring arrived slowly along the coast. The marsh around Wren Harbor turned green again. The old dock still leaned exactly as Daniel remembered it. Nothing about the property looked grand enough to become the monument Marion had imagined. That made me love it even more. Caleb and I spent nearly every other weekend there. We repaired loose boards, painted the boathouse, cleared fallen branches after storms. For the first time since Daniel died, Wren Harbor belonged to memory instead of conflict. One Saturday afternoon, Caleb sat at the end of the dock with his fishing line in the water. He had grown taller. Daniel's blazer finally fit him properly. Not because he wore it often anymore, because he had grown into his father's hope. His therapist had encouraged him to talk about the gala whenever he wanted. Sometimes he did. Most days he didn't. Healing isn't forgetting. It's deciding the memory no longer gets to choose every morning. That afternoon, he looked across the water and asked, "Mom? Yeah? Can I tell you something I never said?" I put down the tackle box. "Always." He watched the ripples for a while before speaking. "I don't think Grandma hated me." "I don't think so either." "I think—" He searched for the words. "She liked my picture more than she liked me." The sentence settled over the water like evening light. Children sometimes understand adults more clearly than adults understand themselves. He wasn't talking about photographs. He was talking about being loved only when he helped someone else's story. I reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "You deserved someone who loved both." He nodded once. "I know now." That answer was worth more than every legal victory combined. A few weeks later, Adrienne called. "The final paperwork is ready." I drove to her office one last time. There wasn't much left to sign. The settlement incorporated every protection Daniel had hoped for. The Archer Trust remained untouched. Wren Harbor could never be marketed, transferred, or represented in connection with charitable fundraising without trustee authorization. Caleb's image, personal story, and likeness required written consent. The remaining restricted donations would be redirected under court supervision. Laurel House adopted new governance policies. Independent financial oversight became mandatory. The papers were surprisingly thin. Years of fighting ended in fewer than 30 pages. Before I left, Adrienne handed me one final envelope. It came through counsel. There was no return address. I already knew. Marion. I waited until I got home before opening it. The letter was handwritten. Not typed, not polished, not written for donors. It wasn't an apology in the way movies teach us apologies should sound. She never admitted everything. She never used words like manipulation or deception. She still believed much of what she had done came from love. But near the end, she wrote one sentence that made me stop reading. "I spent so much time protecting Daniel's legacy that I forgot Daniel left me his son, not his memory." I read that sentence 3 times, then folded the letter carefully. I didn't forgive Marion because she finally understood. I forgave her because carrying the weight of what she refused to become no longer belonged to me. The letter went into the settlement binder, not as redemption, as the final document in the story. By summer, Caleb and I made another decision. One Daniel and I had talked about years earlier. We moved to Wilmington, not to run away, to begin somewhere that wasn't built around constant reminders of who Marion wanted us to be. I transferred my compliance work to a national consulting firm that allowed remote clients. Caleb started at a new school where nobody knew the Vale name. Nobody knew Laurel House. Nobody knew the gala. He introduced himself simply as Caleb Whitaker. The first time I heard him do that, I smiled. Not because he rejected Daniel, because he no longer felt obligated to carry someone else's expectations. Our new house wasn't large. It had peeling shutters, a narrow porch, and a backyard just big enough for a vegetable garden Caleb insisted we plant ourselves. The first piece of furniture we bought wasn't a couch, it wasn't a television, it was a dining table. Solid oak, 6 chairs. The delivery men asked where I wanted it. I thought for a moment, then placed one chair at the head. Not because I needed authority, because someone had to choose where the family gathered. That evening, Caleb helped set the table. He counted forks, folded napkins, lined up glasses with far more concentration than the task required. When he finished, he looked around. "Which seat is mine?" I smiled. "Pick one." He looked confused. "Any of them?" "Every one of them." He walked slowly around the table before choosing the chair beside mine. Then he laughed. "I don't need a place card anymore." "No." "You'll always know where I belong?" I looked at the table, the windows, the backyard, the life we had built, one careful decision at a time. I always did. That night, after Caleb went to bed, I unpacked one final box. Inside was Daniel's blazer, Arthur's letters, the trust documents, the settlement binder, and the old escort card from the gala. For a long moment, I held it in my hand. Then I slipped it between the pages of the completed case file and closed the binder forever. It no longer represented where my son belonged. It represented where he would never be sent again. Sometimes I still think about Daniel's note. If Mom ever tries to make Wren Harbor into a monument, call Adrienne. For years I believed those words were the reason we survived. Now I know they were only the beginning. Daniel built the shield. Adrienne showed me how to use it. Denise chose truth when silence was easier. Mr. Harlan believed documents over appearances, but none of that would have mattered if I had kept accepting Marion's version of our lives. The law protected Caleb's future. Courage gave him the freedom to live it. Years later, when friends visited our home for dinner, nobody asked where Caleb should sit. Nobody checked a seating chart. Nobody looked for approval. He simply pulled out a chair, sat beside the people who loved him, and started telling a story about school, fishing, or the latest project he wanted to build. Every time I watched him do that, I thought about the ballroom, the giant donor wall, the missing place card, the empty family chair. Then I looked at the table in front of me. No reserved seats, no symbols, no performances, just family. And for the first time since Daniel died, that was enough.